Welcome to the Parliamentary Channel's live coverage of the House of Assembly. Today, the substantive debate on the 2013-2014 budget begins. From the PLP side, the governing party, we have the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Golden Isles MP Michael Halkitis. He's going to lead off debate. He will be followed by Foxhill MP Fred Mitchell, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration. We don't know who the opposition is going to present first, but those are the two members of the government who will present first in this budget debate, which begins today. As we do always, we want to mention and go back 40 years to 1973, our countdown to independence. As we prepare to celebrate 40 years of independence, we go back to the House in June of 1973. June 6th, actually, of 1973, 40 years ago, Cleophas Adley, the then UBP Member of Parliament for the city, he replaced Sir Stafford Sands, who, of course, had resigned and left the country. Cleophas Adley was asking questions about Norman LeBlanc and Robert Vesco, names that have figured in Bahamian history. Vesco, of course, investigated by the U.S. authorities, international authorities, for any number of alleged crimes. But Cleophas Adley was in the House of Assembly asking questions of the government. He wanted to know whether these men were on the stop list, Norman LeBlanc and Robert Vesco, and whether the government was aware of their activities. Of course, Sir Lyndon Pinling answered his questions, and he said they're not on the stop list. They, as far as we're aware, their businesses are legitimate, and so, as far as we're concerned, they're fine. Also, the Member of Parliament then for Marsh Harbour, Arrington Watkins, he was part of that secessionist movement. They wanted no part of independence for the Bahamas. He actually moved the resolution that was defeated. That was on June the 6th, 1973. You see a photo of Mr. Watkins arriving back at the Nassau International Airport from Abaco. I'm told that at the same time in another part of the airport, Sir Lyndon was also returning to the capital. Of course, you know, he represented Kemps Bay for many, many, many years. His last 25 years in Parliament, in fact. Also, on that day, there were questions about the transfer of land between the Bahamas Industrial Development Corporation and the St. George's Club, and also questions about the beautification of the East-West Highway. E.J. Roll, it turned out, later PLP senator, was the one responsible for taking care of that beautification process. That is what was happening June 6th, 40 years ago. Again, today will be the start of that budget debate, 2013-2014, what Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie, calls a pivotal budget in the history of the Bahamas. I thought what we should do, instead of our usual recap, we're going to just let Mr. Christie hit some of the highlights of his presentation in the House of Assembly last week. Here's Mr. Christie presenting his budget communication for 2013-2014.
For the future in the areas of employment and entrepreneurship, with the completion of the tourism plant of Atlantis and Bahamas in New Providence, as well as developments underway or in the pipeline in Bimini, Grand Bahama, Exuma, San Salvador, Abaco, Eleuthera, and Cat Island, among others. In this budget, my government is acting decisively to improve the health of the public finances and to pull us out of the debilitating public debt spiral that we inherited upon coming to office. We are also strengthening the foundations of the economy to secure steady growth and private sector employment creation. We are positioning my government to have the resources with which to implement over the full course of our mandate initiatives that will strengthen law and order, promote stronger growth and job creation, and solidify our firm commitment to maintaining and reforming our social safety net for the effective delivery of relief to the disadvantaged and to the needy in our midst. Fiscal consolidation and a lower debt burden are not objectives in and of themselves, but rather the means to the attainment of the far greater economic and social goals that we all cherish. For the ordinary Bahamian, it means that valuable public sector resources, instead of being used for principal and interest payments, will be used for the hiring of police and defense force officers, doctors, nurses, and for programs that fight poverty and the like. It means that we would have transformed the administrative bureaucracy of the public sector into a leaner and more efficient system. Employment conditions did improve somewhat in 2012. Department of Statistics survey estimates that between May and November of 2012, the national unemployment rate fell to 14% from 14.7%. That is also down 2 full points from the peak of 15.9% in November 2011. And 2013-2014, we will have allocated in excess of $8 million to the police force to allow it to increase its manpower complement by over 450 officers. More specifically, in the next fiscal year, the force will more than triple the size of its recruitment and training class to 100 officers from the usual complement of 30. As well as we will begin a 5-year process to invest approximately $175 million in the modernization of the marine fleet and harbor facilities of the Defense Force in order to better patrol our seas and borders, protect our marine resources, and strengthen our capacity to respond to natural disasters throughout the Family Islands. An expansion of airlift into the Bahamas. We are also targeting opportunities in the areas of medical research, sports, heritage, and religious tourism. The government is developing stem cell legislation as a means of further promoting medical research tourism. While the government does attach a high priority to identifying, promoting, and supporting new foreign direct investment projects, we are also cognizant of the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises that are important engines of growth and job creation. We are therefore developing a new policy framework that will enhance the creation and expansion. As an immediate measure, we have allocated $10 million to the capital budget of the Ministry of Works and Urban Development for urban renewal small home repairs. This program will benefit small contractors and provide jobs targeting our young males. It will support much needed improvement in the substandard housing conditions which many of the poor among us endure. In this budget, my government is also allocating $5.5 million of our own resources to the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in 2012-2014 for the construction of new primary and secondary schools in Inagua, San Salvador, Gregory Town, and Los San Andres. Mr. Mr. Speaker, that is more than double the amount allocated last year and a virtual tripling of the sums allocated in 2011-2012. I'm also pleased to announce that the government will rent and renovate Our Lady's Catholic Primary School to accommodate some 100 special needs children. Further recognizing the need for heightened attention to those with special needs, it is equally a pleasurable experience for me to indicate that my government also plans to begin construction in New Providence of a new educational and multi-purpose facility for persons with special needs. We are also committed to providing facilities in our schools for persons with special needs. In addition, we want to ensure that when they are no longer able to attend schools like Garventines, for example, facilities such as the one to be developed and provided where they may attend during the day, Mr. Speaker, will be introduced. In the area of health, I wish to signal that the government is currently reviewing all aspects, including costing of a national health insurance program. We are committed to the establishment of such a scheme during this term, and through the review process, we will determine how best to phase in this program in the period ahead. We are also committed to the construction of many hospitals across the nation. Currently, 2 such hospitals are on the drawing board in South Eleuthera and Cat Island, and construction is slated to begin in 2013-2014. Mr. Speaker, my government remains committed to the housing program. The grave economic situation that we inherited has delayed our ability to proceed as expeditiously as we would have liked. But we are now in a position to move forward with the construction of new homes. The Minister of Housing will provide additional details during the budget debate. Yes. As well, Mr. Speaker, the government will invest just over $4 million next year to establish, I better start over again, because I've been waiting for this one for a long time. Let me say it the right way. Mr. Speaker, the government, this government, will invest just over $4 million next year to establish the new School of Agriculture and Marine Sciences in Northampton. To be built on the site of the old agricultural research facility, the institute will include a tutorial commercial farm and is projected to be fully self-sustaining within 5 years.
Yes, sir.
As an adjunct to the College of the Bahamas, it will offer diploma and certification programs as well as skills training, and its curriculum will combine both academic and practical components. It is estimated that initiatives sparked by the school could potentially place a 15% dent in our total food imports.
Yes,
in addition, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin the process of investing some $10 million in the construction of multi-purpose sporting facilities in the Family Islands that will give young athletes in these communities the opportunities to develop in competitive sports on a similar basis as those in New Providence and Grand Bahamas. So say ye.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, and I say this in the context of having an incredible experience in Junkanoo, but this is different. We will begin the process through private and public sector partnerships of working on the development of a major week-long national cultural festival oriented to the start of the Lenten season. This will mark the start of the Bahamian Carnival or Mardi Gras. The budget allocates $1 million to this initiative next year. The festival is targeted for startup in 2015 and could incorporate a cultural village public processions and song competitions, costume competitions. We believe that this stimulus to Bahamian music, art, entertainment, and other cultural forms will reap inestimable rewards for generations to come. Various groups, Mr. Speaker, similar to the Saxons, Valley Boys, and other Junkanoo groups, would be led into becoming corporate entities.
One family.
These entered one family. One family. One family. Spanish Wells and Harbour Island. These entities, Mr. Speaker, officially in the business of cultural tourism, would be selling costumes, including online sales, both here and abroad. There will be specific stipulations that a certain percentage of the contents of costumes will be made of straw and sisal. Such stipulations would stimulate and provide a much-needed boost to those domestic industries.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt whatsoever that we can foreshadow a burst of entrepreneurship from cultural tourism, including costume design and creation, writing and performance of music, dance and choreography, visual arts, lighting, stage design, and the protection of the intellectual property emanating from this arena. And you will find, Mr. Speaker, that thousands of people will fly into the Bahamas for this occasion.
Yes, sir.
Note, Mr. Speaker, with respect to this carnival, this festival, this Mardi Gras, by whatever name we end up calling it, we note that crime statistics decreasing during the Junkanoo months. Junkanoo promotes teamwork and teaches compromise and other important social skills.
Yes, sir.
There is discipline inculcated in the practice of Junkanoo. We believe that these same benefits can be transposed to the pre-Lenten Mardi Gras or Carnival that will begin in 2015 in this country. As an example of successful public and private sector partnering, I would signal, Mr. Speaker, the new development in Bimini, which is now in full swing. A private sector cruise ship will be dedicated exclusively to that island to provide a steady flow of visitors. I believe that cruise ship has now crossed the Atlantic and is in the shipyard at Grand Bahama being refurbished for launching in July. But that cruise ship will fly between Florida and Bimini daily, twice a day, and giving Biminites the privilege of being able to travel at a very, very cheap rate, Mr. Speaker, to be told to them at a future date between Miami and Bimini. Mr. Speaker, there are also significant airport and port expansions in the make, Mr. Speaker, that we will be, and the minister responsible will be speaking to. In all, we are looking at the transformation of both North and South Bimini, with the people of Bimini being fully involved in that process. This is a very concrete example of the progress that we are making, and not only a wishful hope. This exists, is happening now, and we will be able to see it and touch it. Mr. Speaker, we expect hundreds of jobs to be created by July and August, Mr. Speaker, when the casino opens and other businesses open to support that. So this, Mr. Speaker, is a reality that exists. Mr. Speaker, a proposal for Cat Island, with again hundreds of new potential new jobs, is under consideration, very active consideration. In fact, I think we are at the stage in that where we only have to settle the provision of water and formally and the airport, Mr. Speaker, and then it is all to the races. Mr. Speaker, something that again is very significant to us as we try to stimulate the agricultural sector. We are allocating $1 million toward the installation of greenhouses for gardening purposes at the prison, schools, and special education facilities, the William A. Pratt and Simpson Penn Centers, seniors, and the children's homes throughout our country, as well as in urban renewal communities as a means of providing employment and a source of marketable produce. Remains acutely mindful of the plight of the more needy members of our society. Even as we tighten up on our expenditure allocations, we have sustained our commitment to social assistance transfers to individuals in need through the Ministry of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, I turn to medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. As for our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, it is a comprehensive and multifaceted, covering both recurrent expenditure and recurrent revenue. As I have stated, we must arrest the deteriorating state of the public finances. There must therefore be an unwavering commitment to this process. I will provide additional details in this communication on progress to date and plans for the future. In terms of measures to significantly and structurally enhance recurrent revenues, Mr. Speaker, we are implementing a fundamental reform of our tax system, including the introduction of a value-added tax in July 2014. We are steadily proceeding with the establishment of the new Central Revenue Agency. We are continuing to pursue a thorough and comprehensive reform and modernization of the real property tax system. We are advancing our program to modernize the Customs Department, and we are moving ahead with the plan to introduce the new excise stamps for tobacco products as a means of significantly curtailing revenue leakage in that area. As for recurrent expenditure, Mr. Speaker, we are bringing the new Financial Administration and Audit Act fully into force on July 1st, 2013. We are in the process of restructuring the Ministry of Finance. I want to say it again. We are in the process of restructuring the Ministry of Finance such that it is better positioned to effectively monitor the operations and expenditures of all ministries, departments, and public corporations. Mr. Speaker, with respect to tax reform and value-added tax, earlier this year, the government released a white paper on tax reform whose overriding objectives are to secure an adequate revenue base in support of our medium-term fiscal consolidation targets, while promoting enhanced efficiency and growth of the domestic economy. The cornerstone of that reform plan is the introduction of a value-added tax on July 1st, 2014, along with concurrent reductions in both imports, duties, and excise taxes. Internally, the government is now reviewing the draft VAT legislation. This document will be released for public review and consultations by early summer, with a view to tabling and passing in Parliament by the end of 2013. We have begun the process of public consultations, which will intensify over the summer months. The government is mindful and will move cautiously to maintain the Bahamas' external competitiveness. We are also committed to mitigating the impact of VAT on the poor, and have commissioned a study to quantify these effects with the view of having adequate protection provided through our social safety net system. I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, we are not in any circumstances going to compromise on our commitment to the most disadvantaged in our country. You can rest assured of that.
Yeah, I know.
Government's planned investments to grow the economy.
That was Mr. Christie and some of the highlights of his presentation last week. Allocations, those are important. As we heard last week, those allocations, most 99.9% of them actually are down this year. It's part of what I call My description of the budget is the Hold'em budget, because there's not a lot of money to spend. In fact, the government is planning to borrow some $465 million to get through this fiscal year. Allocations, though. Let's take a look at the allocations for some of the ministries as they are for 2013-2014. Here's Carla Palmer with that. Well, we're gonna have that for you in a minute. Again, presenting this morning, leading off for the government, would be the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Michael Halkitis. He's the Golden Isles MP, and of course he is the one really who's in the midst of the numbers and crunching the numbers with the other technocrats in the Ministry of Finance. He's going to lead off debate and expand some more on his presentation, as well as a press conference that he and 5 other ministers had after the budget communication by Mr. Christie last week. He is going to lead off and put some meat, as is expected, on the bones of what was laid out by Mr. Christie. That is actually what we expect to happen. That is what we expect from all of the ministers who present. And again, we're talking about Minister Halkitis and then Minister Mitchell. We know, for example, in the mid-year budget debate, Minister Mitchell talked about the funds he had available to him, and immigration primarily. Most of the money was gone by mid-year. A lot of it having been spent on repatriation efforts. There was some money for the refurbishment and repair of the detention center. And so, again, a containment budget is what I call it. Just the bare bones, but we'll hear some more about that from the ministers as they present. Again, we're not sure what the opposition, who in the opposition is going to present first. We'll let you know that as soon as we do. But let's look now again at the allocations for specific ministries.
$26 million deficits are extensive, beginning with our key industry, tourism. The objective? To keep the name of the Bahamas in the forefront of people's mind as a leading tourist destination. To this end, the Ministry of Tourism has been allocated $83 million this budgetary period, with $10 million for its marketing campaign. Still, tourism is getting almost $3 million less this budget period than the last. To protect not only our tourism product, but residents against crime and reduce the fear of crime, the government has earmarked in excess of $127 million to the Royal Bahamas Police Force. $5 million less, though, this year to that department. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force gets close to $54 million, still a decrease here of over $803,000 than the previous year. For the most part, there's been decreases in allocations to various government agencies across the board. The Department of Public Works gets almost $18 million. The Department of Education will receive in excess of $199 million. The Ministry of Education, Science and Technology will receive almost $43 million. The College of the Bahamas, $22 million. The Ministry of Transport and Aviation, $6 million plus. The Department of Civil Aviation, $13 million. Social Services, almost $40 million. The Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, $14 million. The Public Service Department, $178 million plus. The Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, almost $12 million. The Ministry of Works and Urban Development gets in excess of $30 million, almost $5 million more of last year's budget. And the Public Hospitals Authority gets the lion's share this budgetary period of well over $199 million. Another one of 2 increases overall. For the Parliamentary Channel, I'm Carla Palmer.
That was a look at the allocations, some of them in this year's budget. Again, as you saw and heard, most of them are down, and we want to welcome those listeners from immediate response, Radio 1540, the National Voice, 104.5, and of course, Radio 810 in Grand Bahama. I also have to tell you that we are streaming live, livestream.com/ZNS Bahamas. You can visit us at our website. You can also hit us up on Facebook. All of that to get the proceedings here today from Parliament. Again, the budget debate begins in earnest. The Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Michael Harkitis, will lead off for the government. He will be followed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, the Honorable Fred Mitchell. Now, what about this budget? We spoke with Chartered Accountant Philip Galanis to get his take on this budget and his view, what to expect, what kind of budget it is. Mr. Galanis spoke with our Cyan Thompson. Let's listen to what Mr. Galanis had to say about this year's budget.
I think that it's important for us to recognize that the budget really represents, in my view, a noble effort in very difficult economic times to allocate resources, limited resources, as effectively and efficiently as possible. Most people don't recognize it, but the budget allocations are very limited in as much as the highest item of allocation of expenditure relates to emoluments, what are called personal emoluments, what we call wages and salaries. And that amount, it represents about 60% of the total budget. And then there is the debt service, which represents another 20%, which means that at the end of the day, the government really only has about 80% of the total budget of about $1.7 billion, or about a little more than half a billion dollars, $500 million, to allocate over national security, education, health, transportation, aviation, a whole range of activities. And so the government is extremely curtailed in its ability to really be able to do a lot because it doesn't have a lot to start with. Now, having said that, I believe that this budget represents, for the first time in a long time, an attempt to reverse the increasing levels of deficits as well as the increasing levels of debt that have been incurred over the past few years. This budget has a slightly lower deficit. In other words, the excess amount of monies that are going to be spent over that received will be slightly decreased over the last year. And the level of debt, the amount of government borrowings this year, is also going to be slightly reduced, nearly about $450 million. It's as compared to $550 million last year. And so I think that we're beginning to see the government move in the right direction in terms of allocation of what we consider to be very limited resources. The government has anticipated that, or has announced rather, that it's going to implement value-added tax, VAT for short, as of July of next year. And in other words, this time next year we should be very close to the implementation of the value-added tax. And the reason for the VAT is clearly because the government recognizes, as we do as Bahamians, that the shortfall in revenue simply is not sustainable, does not cover the expenditures, and that we cannot continue on the line or the stream of borrowings that we've been doing over the past decade, that we've got to find additional measures of revenue. Value-added tax clearly is, again, a step, I think, that's very positive for the country, in as much as currently our customs duties regime focuses purely on goods, not on services, on goods, whereas value-added tax is going to address both goods and services. And so persons who offer services like myself, accountants, doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects, and others, will themselves find that they're going to be required to add a level of tax, and right now the number that's being bandied about is 15%, and that is still out, the jury's still out on that, but I think it's a step in the right direction. We have to recognize that government is a big, big enterprise. It's big business, and it requires a lot of money to keep it going. We have to recognize also that, particularly having regard for our geographical nature, that is, because we're an archipelago, we've got 22 islands, that all of which need airports, ports, schools, hospitals, clinics if not hospitals, roads, street lights, and so forth. That has to be funded. It has to come from someplace. And I believe that in the final analysis, it is a far better thing to do to proceed along the area of a value-added tax as compared to an income tax. I think it's a bit ambitious to try to get everything in place for next year. The government has set that as a target. I don't see it as accidental in terms of its timing, because it's set to coincide with what is expected to be the accession of the Bahamas to the World Trade Organization, WTO. And so a lot of the things that we see developing now really are foundational or groundwork and foundation building exercises to hopefully move the economy to a better place, to create more jobs, to grow the gross domestic product, and at the end of the day to be able to provide more for all Bahamians.
Accountant Philip Galanis giving his take on the budget, talking at the end there, among other things, about VAT. July of 2014 is when the value-added tax regime is supposed to be introduced. Mr. Christie talking about the expansion of e-government and being able to make the various departments more public-friendly, customer-friendly. Some work and the infrastructure being put in place to accommodate and accomplish that as well. Talking about taxes. The motor dealers are saying the decision to charge them for the value of the car as opposed to the engine size is going to wreak havoc on that industry. Well, the used car dealers are probably going to have a good time and looking forward to it, because what it will mean, according to the dealers, and given the economy, more people will be inclined to buy used cars. The banks, 3% tax, and of course repatriated profits, trust companies, etc., etc. You repatriate the Bahamian dollars, there's going to be a tax on that as well. Well, there's some good people taxes, if you will. First-time homeowners, home buyers, that's going to be extended for an additional 5 years. No duty on solar panels or on defibrillators for people concerned about their health. And so, lots of things in this budget. One of the things most people agree is that jobs would cover a multitude of sins. And so, jobs really are what people are looking for, either persons to create them or some jobs that are being created. Support of Mr. Christie said to me, Mr. Christie's not too worried about that because he knows what's going to happen. Mr. Christie says he knows what is going to happen, and he points to what he considers evidence. It goes all the way back to the Cove in Eleuthera, and then he jumps to Grand Bahama, and he talks about Reef Village and what, between the construction and permanent jobs, at least 1,000 permanent jobs, jobs being created down there in Grand Bahama. And of course, the casino, whomever the new operators are, it's a good opportunity that the operator or one of the operators, there may be 2 casinos in Grand Bahama, one of the operators could very well be a Bahamian group. So he says some things are going to happen in Grand Bahama, and so he knows, he believes the jobs are going to be created. A yacht registry is supposed to be established in Grand Bahama, as is an arbitration center. And of course, some people say, well, you know, we're not quite sure whether an arbitration center can work in Grand Bahama. We're not sure the supporting infrastructure is there. Well, the government and its advisors believe that that is something that can happen in Grand Bahama. And so those are 2 additional initiatives that are planned for Grand Bahama: yacht registry and, of course, the arbitration center. We go to Bimini, which is another area that Mr. Christie is bullish on what is plan for Bimini. And he talks about Genting and the Bimini Bay project and the casino that is supposed to open next month in July. And of course, the dedicated cruise ship. And in an earlier report, you saw pictures of that cruise ship. He's excited about Bimini and what happens there. He talks again when you talk about job creation. Some of them permanent, some of them not so permanent. Hospitals to be built in Eleuthera and in Cat Island. Talking about Cat Island. Cat Island is one of those islands where there is supposed to be a project coming on stream soon. Talk about a PGA village, and of course the construction of a new airport at the Bight. So again, talking about jobs, development, permanent jobs, hopefully will be created from some of the initiatives introduced in this budget. Also being introduced in this budget, $4 million for the School of Agriculture and Marine Science over in Andros, that a lot of people have talked about. And Mr. Christie, again, excited about that, even though, again, there are some who say, well, first of all, you don't need to go through all of that. On the other hand, they say, well, we're not quite sure how that's going to work. Well, Mr. Christie says he and his advisors and the government believes that that school will not only produce a whole lot of qualified Bahamians who know the science of agriculture and marine science, it should help to put a dent in the food bill by about 15%. You know, we import between half a billion and $1 billion worth of foodstuffs every year into the country. That is supposed to be one of those areas that is supposed to take care of some of that as we talk about self-containment and being able to take care of ourselves. Again, we are waiting for the legislators to begin debate this morning on the 2013-2014 budget. Of course, the new fiscal year comes into effect on the 1st of July. And so this debate is expected to last at least 2 weeks. And then, of course, the debate will leave the House of Assembly and come to the Senate, where it needs to be debated, and then, of course, sent to the Governor General for his signature, those budget bills. Again, there's a resolution to allow the government to borrow $465 million. That is to help to allow the government, give the government some headroom to operate. And talking about headroom, there isn't a lot of that. Talking about alternate sources of revenue. Well, alternate sources of money anyway. Prime Minister in Trinidad and Tobago, CARICOM, meeting with the Chinese president. Signed an agreement for $8 million for technical assistance, and so that certainly will help matters a lot as the government looks for additional sources of revenue. Talking about taxes and how the Bahamian people will be affected, BEC, which is in the news, and we know that everybody talks about the high cost of energy. Energy costs a lot of money. Well, one of the things the government has decided it is going to do, it is going to remove the tax on imports, fuel imports for BEC, which should help a lot. Of course, on the other hand, corporations like BEC, like Nassau Airport Development, are going to have to pay a business license fee now. And persons are questioning, how is that going to work? How is that going to affect the bills of consumers going forward. Again, that is something we will have to see, and we know the initiatives that are being embarked upon, engaged in by the government. They are attempting to get thousands of households back on the grid because, of course, you don't have people paying their electricity bills, or you don't have people connected, then there's no reason for them to do business with you. And that certainly is a source of revenue, no matter how small it is, that you are missing if those persons are not connected to the grid. And so, again, of course, the chairman has been very vocal about that, telling the Bahamian people the things that the government intends to do with respect to BEC and trying to get people reconnected to the power grid, and of course for their benefit as well. Again, first-time homeowners, their exemption is going to be extended for an additional 5 years. That, again, is one area where lots of people will be quite happy to hear about that. Again, what I call the Hold'em budget, because there's not a lot of money, and the government is saying that hopefully by 2017 they are able to halve this deficit. I think with what is going on now, we could be as high as 60, 65% debt to GDP ratio, which is a troubling statistic, and one that is not good for us when we think of the international ratings agencies and the ability to access funds from overseas. In fact, we want to be closer to 30. It's more likely that we'll be more in the 40 range, maybe as high as 50. But again, and again, this is something that the Minister of State, Michael Halkitis, has been taken to task for, because he said, listen, we borrowed $465 million. At least we're going in the right direction, because we borrowed 500+ million. And so with the initiatives that they are introducing, hopefully all of this will help to provide revenue for the government. Talking about jobs, Bahamas, which is expected to be a major source of employment, and we know the situation with Bahamas, where right now the majority human component at that site is Chinese, which is something that people are not very happy about, but that is the way it is. Everyone, though, is looking forward to the completion of that project, when Bahamians hopefully will qualify and be able to take up those jobs that will be available. And Bahamas has got a training initiative going on, but in addition to that, the government introducing the National Training Agency. That should be introduced this month, if not the ending part of June. And former MP Agatha Marcel, she was the Member of Parliament for South Beach in the first Christie administration. She has been very involved in the creation of that National Training Agency, and so hopefully that will act as a source of education, preparedness, and training for Bahamians, so that they're able to take up the jobs that will become available. Again, we are here at Parliament, and we are waiting the start of the 2013-2014 budget debate. We expect the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Michael Halkitis, to lead off that debate. He will be followed by the Member of Parliament for Fox Hill, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, Fred Mitchell. They're going to present, and then we are most likely to hear from a member of the opposition, but that could very well not happen until this afternoon session, where there will be two more members of the government presenting, today. That is the plan as the budget debate gets underway. Also, on Thursday, tomorrow, there will be 4 additional members of the government presenting as well. And again, we expect quite possibly there would be 2 members of the opposition presenting. We do not have their names as yet. We will give them to you as soon as they are available and they are known to us. 1.4 billion revenue expense bill that is going to be moved by Minister Halkitis this morning whenever we get underway here at Parliament. Budget debate, something that is on everyone's mind, of course, as people await what is in store for them once this budget is introduced. And so let's join them now in the House of Assembly as they prepare for this morning's session.
With one. It was one of the shortest in the whole list. 2 words. It said, try Jesus. And when you understand that he was God's only Son, our wisdom, our Prince of Peace, our all and in all, is still good counsel. Try Jesus. One of his servants wrote a lot about life, especially in his older years. His name was Solomon. And there's a book for the preacher called Ecclesiastes, shortened The Preacher. And in that conclusion of everything Solomon wrote, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. I trust that the conclusion of your debate will be peaceable and profitable, especially in this session. Let us pray. Great God and our Father, we thank you for the gift of life and for the blessings we receive in this commonwealth. For those who've been disadvantaged and distressed by the waters, we ask for your mercy and your grace and your help. And be with those responsible for relieving this tension and this pressure that soon our people will be back to normal again. Remember the students. We thank you for those represented here today and those writing their final exams for this school year. Be with all our educators and bless the leaders of our country in every phase of government. Thank you for this honorable house. Bless our speaker and those in authority, and may everything today redound to thy glory and to thine honor, to our satisfaction, so that our people will move on from strength to strength and from grace to glory. Thank you for hearing our prayer, which we offer in the name of him who taught us when we pray to say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory,
forever and ever.
Amen.
And Grant, Butler Turner, Key, L. Miller, Turnquest, Dr. Rollins, R. Lightburn, P. Forbes, A. Forbes, H. Chipman, G. Morse, T. Neely, R. Curry.
No.
Good morning, honorable members. It is a delight to be here this morning for the sitting of Parliament. Welcome to a new sitting. Article 54, subsection 1 of our Constitution dictates that Parliament may make laws for the peace, order, and good governance of the Bahamas. Today we commence debate on what is commonly referred to as the budget debate by way of second reading of an appropriation bill. The debate will be managed within the framework of a series of bills and a resolution to borrow $465 million. Before we continue with our proceedings, I should like to bring a few matters to your hearing. Firstly, I'm always delighted to have joining with us as guests is the Sunland Baptist Academy All-Age School from Grand Bahama. It's so nice that you have joined us this morning. I understand you're led by teachers Denise Minus, Wendy Hannibal, and parents Aniska Rule, Erica Rule, and Patricia Rule, Mrs. Colebook, and Mrs. Hall. We are delighted that you have joined us this morning. We trust that what is said and done will be educational and informative to you. In fact, I look forward to seeing you next week at your graduation of the high school, in which I have the privilege of speaking at the graduation ceremonies. So I look forward to that next week, Thursday. Welcome once again. The Director of Youth Against Violence, Pastor Carlos Reed, has once again extended an invitation for members of the House, along with the honorable senators, to participate in the 18th annual celebrity basketball game between pastors and politicians. If last year was any indication of our chance of victory, this year, then perhaps all pastors ought to pray for us. The good news is there's still time to prepare through training, exercise, and recruitment. This crowd-pleasing game will be held on July 20th, 2013 at 7:30 p.m. at the Kendall Isaacs Gym. This is also your formal notice that yours truly is certainly contemplating resigning as head coach for this year. Need a better team. We look forward to your participation. Honorable members, be advised that effective last Wednesday's House sitting, the television public witnessed for the first time a captured circle at the bottom left of the television screen, a professional engaged in the art of sign language for the purpose of the hearing impaired. Thanks to the Broadcasting Corporation and the Parliamentary Channel, we are delighted to provide this service to an important segment of our viewing audience. Additionally, honorable members, you're reminded that through you and the general public, that we are streaming live at www.znsbahamas.com and www.livestream.com/House of Assembly, where viewers are able to not only see the parliamentary meetings, but also to participate in the discussions via live chat feature on this site. In fact, on Wednesday the 15th of May, both the upper house and lower chambers of Parliament met in the morning at the same time. ZNS and the Parliamentary Channel was able to provide for the first time live streaming of both houses of Parliament and the Senate, House of Assembly and the Senate to our global online audience simultaneously. Additionally, our live stream channel of the House has free on-demand and autopilot features, which means our viewers can watch and stream at any time pause, and replay at will. We are certainly pleased that the proceedings of our Parliament and the information therein is now directly transmitted to the global village. Finally, honorable members, as debate today is expected to be spirited and provocative, it is my prayer that the proceedings, most importantly, is constructive, dignified, and educational for the Bahamian public, particularly our children. To assist in this endeavor, I urge honorable members to exercise prudence and vigilance in adhering to the conventions of debate as articulated in our rule of procedures. I also urge all members to take time and avail themselves of the rules, but of course, the chair remains always on alert to assist you in staying the course. With those remarks, honorable members, let us begin our proceedings today. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table a copy of the Bahamas Air 2010-2011 annual report.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House copies of the following: the Road Traffic Amendment Regulations 2013 and the Road Traffic Amendments Number 2 Regulations 2013.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bain and Grandstown.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House copies of the following: the Industries Encouragement Approved Products Specialty Management Group Limited, trading as SMG Millwork Order 2013, and the Industries Encouragement Approved Manufacturers Specialty Management Group Limited, trading as SMG Millwork Order 2013.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the documents be brought up. In order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Banks and Trust Companies Fees Amendment Regulations 2013 and the Bank of the Bahamas Limited 2012 Annual Report.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. There are none. Statements and communication by ministers. None. Communications by the clerk. None. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions of leave of absence. Leave to resign seat and new writs. Presentation of petitions. presentation of reports of committees, adoption of reports of committees, first reading of bills, second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bain and Grandstown.
Mr. Speaker, before we begin the second reading, I just wish to acquaint the House with how we intend to proceed. The mover of the bill for the government side will be the Minister of State, Mr. Halkitis. We intend to sit until 7 p.m. today and until 1 p.m. tomorrow, Thursday. And then we intend to sit Monday all day, Tuesday from 3 p.m., Wednesday all day, and Thursday all day. Our desire is to seek to complete the debate on the 14th, but if we are unable to do so, to sit the following Monday and Tuesday as is required. Well, this week we'll be sitting until 7 tonight. Next week it's likely that we would sit until 10 p.m. most evenings. And so I'd just like for members to be prepared therefore.
Very well. Thank you, honourable member. Members, you've been so advised. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I move the bill, I would just like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to, as we are beginning a budget debate, to recognize and pay tribute to the contributions of the late Mr. Ehud Cunningham, former acting financial secretary, who recently passed away and who was memorialized this past Thursday at the Christ Church Cathedral. He was involved in the preparation of many of these budgets and helping us to shepherd through these debates. And I wanted to, at the outset, pay tribute to him and recognize his contributions. I also wanted to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to say once again welcome to the new Financial Secretary, Mr. John Roll, a Bahamian with a long career at the Central Bank, most recently engaged at the International Monetary Fund, and now returned home to bring his tremendous skills and ability to bear on, to make his contribution to the Ministry of Finance. And this is the first of these budgets that he has been involved in. So I'd like to welcome him and also say thank you to all the hardworking members of the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, again, just before I delve into the budget, I would like to say a few things about the Golden Isles constituency, and just basically to thank my constituents once again for reposing in me the confidence to send me to this place as their representative. It's been just over a year now, and we have established our community center on the corner of Bacardi Road and Carmichael Road, where there are computer and literacy classes for both adults and children during the week. We successfully staged a summer camp last year, working out of the office, and we intend to do so again this year. I want to say thank you to my colleague, the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, Minister of Works, for facilitating the extensive road works in the Boatswain Hill, the Coral Harbor, and indeed the Adelaide Road area that brought much needed relief to the residents of those areas. We continue to work towards getting our substation for the Royal Bahamas Police Force We look forward to bringing relief in terms of water provision to the Coral Lakes and the Boatswain Hill area, and we continue to work towards improving the public transportation system for those most westerly areas of the constituency, including Coral Harbor and Boatswain Hill, and segments of Cowpen Road. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move second reading and committal of a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2013 and ending the 30th of June 2014. Mr. Speaker, 1 week ago today, the Minister of Finance, the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, presented the government's budget communication for the fiscal year 2013-2014. The communication, Mr. Speaker, was received very well, overwhelmingly well received, as it set out not only a program, Mr. Speaker, not only a program to reverse the growth of government debt, thereby putting the country on a more secure financial footing. It also unveiled creative strategies to grow the economy through attracting foreign direct investment, incentivizing local economic activity, expanding the opportunities for education and training, and it reaffirmed our commitment to law and order and our commitment to preserve the ability of this country to provide relief and assistance to those most in need. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Prime Minister in the budget statements describes this budget as a pivotal budget in the history of our small nation and a budget that secures the future of all Bahamians. Today, as I have the honour to lead off this debate in this Honourable House, Mr. Speaker, I will elaborate on how this budget secures the future for all Bahamians by returning to some of the key messages in the budget communication and provide supplementary details on certain measures and initiatives that were set out in the document. At the outset, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make it very clear that this budget that we present today, on which we begin this debate today, is the first budget in the term of this administration that we have had the opportunity to craft from the beginning. Yes. Having come to power on May 7, 2012, Mr. Speaker, we inherited a budget that was substantially complete, in that we were mandated to bring a budget to Parliament less than 3 weeks after assuming the reins of government. We decided at that time, Mr. Speaker, that it would be counterproductive, it would be harmful, and it would send a wrong message to both Bahamians and the international community to undertake any form of stop, review, and cancel. We knew, Mr. Speaker, that leading up to the election, and indeed following the dissolution of the House, many contracts were executed committing the government of the Bahamas to spend money. But we decided, Mr. Speaker, at the outset that we would avoid any form of stop, review, and cancel, and we committed that as we progressed through the year, we will decide which items were a priority, which items we believe represented value for the money, for the taxpayers' money, and which items that we should continue with. We did that, Mr. Speaker, because we all know, and it's incontrovertible, that following the 2007 general election and the stop, review, and cancel policy, no less than the international rating agency Standard & Poor's, Mr. Speaker, pointed to that very policy and said that it took momentum out of the economy, it undermined investor confidence in the Bahamas, and so contributed to the economic slowdown. And we did not want to do that, Mr. Speaker. So we presented the budget. Mr. Speaker, the fundamental tenets of our government's policy agenda in respect of our core economic and social priorities are detailed in our Charter for Governance. This beautiful document right here. Mr. Speaker, we in this administration have pledged that we will implement the action plan in the Charter over the full 5-year mandate that has been given to us by the Bahamian people. Not in 1 year, Mr. Speaker, not in 2 years, but over the 5-year mandate, we fully expect to be able to implement the policies as contained in our Charter for Governance. And, Mr. Speaker, we will fulfill that pledge. This 2013-2014 budget, Mr. Speaker, is fully faithful to that plan. In essence, our approach to making the plan a reality is measured and balanced, aimed at achieving a broad range of mutually reinforcing objectives. Namely, we are committed to putting the public finances on a solid and sustainable footing for the long haul. That is critically important, Mr. Speaker. All things flow from a sound financial footing. We will only be able to fulfill our commitments to the people of the Bahamas if we put this country on a sustainable and solid financial footing. Mr. Speaker, our plan also includes transforming government into a modern administration that provides public services efficiently and responsively to the needs of our citizens. We must also strengthen economic growth and job creation, and we look forward to building a healthy, more prosperous and secure society. Ours is an ambitious plan, Mr. Speaker. We know it's ambitious, but we believe that the Bahamian people deserve no less. And as the Right Honorable Prime Minister stated in the budget communication, this government is up to the challenge. I want to talk about, as I move on, Mr. Speaker, our plan of action to put the public finances on a sustainable footing for the future. Government, Mr. Speaker, is no different than an individual or a household in that they all must manage their scarce financial resources wisely and budget their expenditures judiciously to ensure that we all live within our means. Otherwise, financial hardship is sure to ensue. The resources of the government are scarce. Individual resources are scarce. We must make a commitment, and we must follow through on that commitment to manage those resources in a way that we can provide the services that we need and the taxpayers' money are allocated properly and we get maximum value for money. Mr. Speaker, it's no secret that when we came to office last year, we inherited an unsustainable fiscal situation. In fact, we faced a debt problem that was increasingly spiraling out of control and ravaging an ever greater portion of our revenue base merely to pay interest on the debt and to cover required principal repayments. Because of that, virtually 25 cents out of every dollar is siphoned off before we can even begin to spend on much-needed programs and services for the public. The burden of public debt, that is, the debt-to-GDP ratio, was poised to shoot from a projected level of roughly 53% at the end of 2012-2013 to almost 70% within a span of only 4 years. So serious was that debt spiral, Mr. Speaker, that had we remained passive and done nothing, fully 33 cents of our intake would have been hived off for debt servicing within a matter of only a few years. 1/3. Mr. Speaker, one only need to look at the evening news, pick up the newspaper, to see what is happening around the globe and see the devastating economic and social damage that can result from lax fiscal policy and runaway public debt. We don't even need to look far, Mr. Speaker, just look right around our region. It reinforces the fact Mr. Speaker, that we must address this situation, and we must address it now, and I'll go into how we are addressing it. Mr. Speaker, this government appreciates the reality that sound public finances are indispensable to a strong and vibrant private sector and economy which is capable of creating sufficient, well-paying employment opportunities. We understand this fully. Too much debt leads to lower ratings, it increases the cost of your borrowings, and makes the country less attractive as a place for investment. So we understand that this is a problem that we must get a handle on. To that end, Mr. Speaker, we developed and released to the public an aggressive medium-term fiscal consolidation plan in this year's mid-year budget statement. Some say we were too aggressive. The fiscal stance presented in the 2013-2014 budget communication, Mr. Speaker, is fully consistent with that plan and keeps us on track to achieve our core targets going forward. Now, this plan does call for us to borrow $465 million in 2013-2014. And while that is down from the well over $500 million in 2012-2013, let there be no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that we are still not satisfied with that level of borrowing, and we remain fully committed to see a continued reduction in that amount from year to year as we grow the economy and thereby increase revenue to the public treasury. With our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, we are moving gradually and in a measured way in the right direction to eliminate the government's recourse to borrowing to finance its activities. In this way, we are balancing the needs for fiscal responsibility with our priorities for strengthening growth and creating jobs. Again, Mr. Speaker, you pick up the paper, you watch the news, you listen to the talk show, you go on the social media. Some people want shock therapy. Some people want the government to cut its expenses by a third. Some people say don't do that. Some say spend more. But we believe, Mr. Speaker, that our gradual and measured approach is the right thing to do. Again, it avoids us having to make those decisions that other countries find themselves facing because we want to take a balanced approach that involves growth of the economy, restraining your expenditure within confined levels, trying to improve the administration of your revenue system, and finding new streams of revenue. And I say again, Mr. Speaker, we believe that this balanced, incremental approach, through this approach, we will not get where we want to be at the end of 1 year. But we believe that if we are faithful to our approach, within a few short years, we would have significantly improved the financial situation of the country. And we have to remain faithful to that, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes, you know, if you listen to what's going on out there, some people, I mean, right after the communication was presented, there was, government is borrowing $465 million. That's too much. Then a few days later, well, don't worry about the borrowing. Grow the economy. Spend some more. Someone else come back, well, we need to cut spending. We need to do something about the public corporations. We are addressing all those things, Mr. Speaker, but we believe we have to do so incrementally because the government still has to play a very, very important part in the economy. I have also heard, Mr. Speaker, doubts being expressed about the ability of this administration to achieve its objectives. I will only say, Mr. Speaker, that we did not derive our medium-term action plan on a whim. It is a well-thought-out strategy developed with input and wide consultation with experts internal to the Ministry of Finance, internal to this country, and as well external experts, Mr. Speaker. And again, many thanks to the entire staff of the Ministry of Finance and throughout the public service who have had input into this strategy. I will say a few words on the projected fiscal outturn for 2012-2013, the current year that we are bringing to a close at the end of this month, Mr. Speaker, and then I want to turn to some additional details on our medium-term fiscal plan, including I want to give some supplementary details on the major actions that we plan for 2013-2014. And I want to go through this, Mr. Speaker, to show that as we move through this year, this fiscal year that ends June 30th, we face a number of challenges, Mr. Speaker. We were able to address those, and we were able to achieve a particular result, Mr. Speaker, due to our commitment and to the, again, hard work and dedication to our targets. The 2012-2013 budget communication, Mr. Speaker, that was presented here 30th of May last year, explained in detail the extent of the fiscal challenge that we inherited when we came to office, and I will not go back into that at this time other than to say they were significant, Mr. Speaker. And I would add that with the large cost overruns that dropped in our laps, that was thrown in our laps from the previous administration, our room to maneuver, any sort of wiggle room was none, non-existent, none. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we were at the time projecting a deficit of $550 million or 6.5% of GDP. At the midpoint of the fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, it was apparent to us that with weaker than expected growth of the economy, our recurrent revenue collections were trending at a considerably lower level than projected. We were collecting less money than we thought we would collect, Mr. Speaker, than was projected. In fact, at the mid-year, we were running some 10 percentage points, 10% below forecast. In response, the government announced in the mid-year statement that it was implementing a number of broad-based fiscal measures in respect of both recurrent and capital expenditure to address the slippage and secure the achievement of our deficit target for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. So what simply that means, Mr. Speaker, is we weren't collecting the amount of revenue that had been forecast. And so to ensure that we did not come in with a deficit that was even larger than we had projected, we realized that we had to make some adjustments to our spending. And that is why you heard that we had asked agencies to seek to constrain their spending, cut it if they could, by about 10%. Again, some said it couldn't be done, Mr. Speaker. But we committed to hold recurrent expenditure this year that we're in, to the level of $1.7 billion, $1.72 billion, down just over $100 million from last year's budget estimates of $1.82 billion. Last week's budget revealed, Mr. Speaker, that we have succeeded in doing even better than that. The current expenditure this year is now estimated at $1.659 billion, down $162 million from the budget forecast, Mr. Speaker. So we were effective. And let me say this, Mr. Speaker. We were effective in controlling the expenditure. And let me say this, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to say, you know, I might have lost some friends around the table, you know, because it very often it falls on us at the Ministry of Finance to say, colleague, I understand what you're trying to do, but you think you can cut that back, or maybe can we reprioritize, or we can't do this now. I don't think I lost any friends, Mr. Speaker. I'm just joking, but I think members were very, very, very understanding. Very understanding. And, you know, when you have to be the one to say, right. And you know, but we think we were very, very successful, Mr. Speaker, in containing our expenditure. With revenues down, Mr. Speaker, we had to contain our expenditure to ensure that we met our deficit targets. The reductions in spending this year, Mr. Speaker, that we achieve are fairly broad-based and spread across the various expenditure heads. The larger savings have been recorded in respect of the Department of Public Service at $29.8 million, the Ministry of Tourism $19.9, the Ministry of Finance $19.4, and the Public Hospitals Authority $17.5 million. Several areas of government, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say this very clearly because, you know, when we announced that we were seeking to trim government expenditure by roughly 10%, there was a lot of outcry, you know, you're cutting, you know, people can't get assistance, what are you doing? You're putting a blunt instrument. Again, Mr. Speaker, several areas of government have been subjected to little or no reduction in their expenditure level this year, in line with our government's core priorities in the near term. These areas included the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Ministry of National Security, the Prisons Department, the College of the Bahamas, BTVI, the Department of Social Services, the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, the Department of Labor, and the Ministry of Works and Urban Development. And so, Mr. Speaker, we were very, very targeted in the areas where we were able to cut expenditure. We have also been able to hold capital expenditure this year below the level originally budgeted, again, by reprioritizing our projects. Capital expenditure is now expected to total $350 million, down $50 million from last May's budget forecast, and $13 million lower than the mid-year budget estimate. The recurrent revenues for this fiscal year 2012-2013, Mr. Speaker, have remained on the somewhat weaker path that we had witnessed in the mid-year, and they are now projected at a level of $1.38 billion, which is a full of $170 million, or 11% below the budget forecast. And that is very instructive to us, Mr. Speaker, because what it shows, and I demonstrated this in last year's budget, is that over the past few years, we have been over-optimistic in our revenue forecast. We were optimistic in our revenue forecast, and because of that, the spending rose to those levels. And so we saw we were saying, oh, we're going to collect this amount of revenue, and we did not do it consistently, but the spending continued to rise. Mr. Speaker, going forward, we have developed a very, very conservative approach to the growth in revenue, and so that we can get a better handle on the situation. We are more conservative with how we're projecting revenue, and because of that, we can better control our spending, we believe, Mr. Speaker. With a weaker economy, the main revenue shortfalls are occurring in the areas of import duties and excise taxes, which are down $49 million and $112 million respectively from the forecast. Stamp taxes on real property transactions are down by $20 million, while business license taxes are down some $15 million from the amount originally budgeted. On the plus side, Mr. Speaker, air departure tax is $10 million higher than was projected in last year's budget. And as I said, despite the revenue weakness, our discipline on the expenditure front has paid dividends in that the GFS deficit in 2012-2013 is now projected at $508 million, down from the $550 million budget estimate. Relative to GDP, the deficit will now come in at 6.1%, down from the 6.5% forecast in both last year's budget and the mid-year statement. And while this is a stellar achievement in and of itself, Mr. Speaker, it marks a stark departure from the experience of our predecessors who invariably, and dare I say miserably, overshot their deficit targets year in and year out. In 2008-2009, they said it would be 2.1%, and it came out at 4.5%. 2009-2010, the target was 3.9%. The outcome was 5.1%. 2010-2011, they said it would be 3%, And if we exclude the exceptional revenues from the sale of BTC, the deficit actually was 4.8%. And sadly, the story goes on after that. In the last year, the deficit objective was 3% of GDP, but in actual fact, the outcome was almost double at 5.6%. So in that perspective, for our government to actually do better than its deficit target in 2012-2013 is indeed and unquestionably an achievement in which we can take great pride. And again, Mr. Speaker, I thank colleagues for their understanding and the entire staff of the Public Service and the Ministry of Finance for their hard work. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that because of that alone, we have clearly demonstrated to Bahamian citizens, the private sector, and the international markets our firm commitment to fiscal discipline and our ability to deliver on our stated fiscal objectives. And so I say to the naysayers, Mr. Speaker, that is what gives us the confidence that we can achieve our objectives. Fact is, we have done it before. No doubt. That is why we are confident, Mr. Speaker. In the upcoming new fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, we have taken the actions necessary to position ourselves to do better yet on the GFS deficit. Our recurrent expenditure is being held to a level of $1.737 billion, basically unchanged from this year as a proportion of GDP. And we were able to do that again, Mr. Speaker, not because we just took a hatchet to the budget, but because many months ago, staff throughout the public service and the Ministry of Finance sat down, went through the budgets, eliminated what was unnecessary, streamlined what could have been streamlined, and basically we are presenting a budget that by and large, for the most part, everybody is happy with. Some are not, and we will get into that, but Mr. Speaker, we think we did the best that we could do. Within that total expenditure of $1.737 billion, Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight some of the larger items, namely our salaries of permanent and pensionable employees total $550 million, salaries of contract workers $25 million, and you would see in the presentation of this budget, Mr. Speaker, that workers on contract within each ministry, the total is presented separately. Mr. Speaker, previously they were presented as development contracts, something else under different headings. So what we're doing in an effort to increase transparency, we're going to see for each ministry how many are on contracts. National insurance contributions account for $22 million, Mr. Speaker. And again, in this budget, what we have done is we have made the Treasury responsible for the payment of all national insurance contributions. So those amounts have been pulled out of the individual ministries and put into the Treasury. Our rental accommodation is $18 million. And again, Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget, in an effort to control costs and for consistency, we have put all of the rental amounts in the Department of Public Service, which is responsible for public accommodations, and that amount is $18 million. So some ministries you would see a reduction in rent. That is because those amounts have been put into the Department of Public Service. We expect to pay $18 million this year for electricity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while we remain positive that we're moving in the right direction in terms of the debt situation, we have not gotten there yet. It is important to note that interest charges on the public debt will absorb $230 million in 2013-2014, with another $86 million allocated for debt redemption. So in total, fully $316 million of the current expenditure of that total is dedicated solely to debt servicing. That leaves us with a discretionary amount, Mr. Speaker, of $1.42 billion. Of that total, almost 50% is accounted for by the items listed above. And these expenditure items, by their nature, are less discretionary than might be desirable and really impinge on our flexibility to address the public finances. And that's why we keep stressing this, and we're always talking about debt redemption and bringing down the debt reduction, bringing down the deficit, Mr. Speaker. Because when you look at what is the government's fixed charges, including the debt, including your salaries, etc., we really, at the end of the day, have very, very little discretion in terms of how we implement policy. And that is why it's so important that we are so careful in allocating the public resources, Mr. Speaker. Capital expenditure in 2013-2014 is being held to a level of $295 million, down $55 million from last year. This also represents a reduction from 4.2% to 3.4% of GDP. As for recurrent revenues, Mr. Speaker, we expect that they will be bolstered by the growth in the economy over the next fiscal year and by the various revenue enhancement measures announced in last week's budget. We believe they will also make a contribution. As for the various fees and charges that are adjusted in the budget, I would reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that most of these fees have remained constant for a number of years, and as such, their adjustment at this time is designed to bring them up to market levels, that they may more fully reflect the cost to the government of delivering the various services that they represent. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, it will be very important to subject those fees to regular reviews to ensure that they continue to cover government's costs. Services are being provided, it costs more for the government to provide these services than is being charged. There's going to be an adjustment because the government cannot continue, Mr. Speaker, in certain areas, of course, that cannot change. But where it can change, we look to try and bring those fees up to at least try to partially compensate for the cost of providing those services. We introduced, Mr. Speaker, a number of bills during the budget. The passenger amendments to bills, the Passenger Tax Act. The legislation is being amended so that departure tax is paid by all outgoing passengers. This is consistent with the industry practice. We are amending the Family Island Development Encouragement Act. We will expend it. The Passenger Tax Act, what's happening, Mr. Speaker, currently individuals under 6 years do not pay, government does not collect departure tax from them. But in reality, the airlines, when they sell a ticket, they include departure tax. But that amount is not remitted to the government. We're removing that anomaly so that everybody, there are no more exemptions. They're always charged, but the government doesn't collect it. Yeah, they're always charged, but the government does not collect. We're just ensuring that now the government can collect. The Family Island Development Encouragement Act, Mr. Speaker, we are extending it for 1 year. And we are proposing an amendment to that act to allow extensions to be done by order of the minister. And, Mr. Speaker, we believe that that is crucially important to continue to stimulate economic activity in the Family Islands, and that is why we are extending that act, Mr. Speaker. The City of Nassau Revitalization Act, again, is being extended for 1 year, and we are proposing an amendment to allow extensions to this act to be done by order of the minister. Again, Mr. Speaker, very important for the revitalization of the City of Nassau. The Excise Act, Mr. Speaker, is now WTO, World Trade Organization, compliant in structure, with the biggest change is the revision to the pre-2010 structure for vehicle duties. The Tariff Act is now WTO compliant, and the major change is the inclusion of alcohol in the schedule, which was formerly in the Stamp Act. We are proposing an amendment to the Real Property Tax Act, Mr. Speaker, to make it mandatory for lenders in the case of commercial properties to pay the property tax 90 days after the amendment comes into force in the absence of evidence of payment by the borrower. We are amending the Stamp Act, Mr. Speaker, to eliminate duties on alcohol, and it imposes stamp duty on the conversion of remittances and dividends and management fees in excess of $500,000 per annum. So funds that are earned in the country in Bahamian dollars, when they are converted to be sent abroad, they will be subject no longer to only a 1.5% stamp duty, but a 5% stamp duty, Mr. Speaker. Business License Act is being amended to introduce a progressive business license schedule and incorporates basic anti-avoidance provisions. The business license for any business with turnover under $500 million remains the same, Mr. Speaker. We are amending the Savings Bank Act to allow the Post Office Savings Bank to invest a larger portion of its reserve in government securities. We're moving that from a limitation of 1/3 of its reserves to 1/2. In addition, we are amending the Insurance Act, the Bahamas Maritime Authority Act, the IRCA Act, the Clifton Heritage Authority Act, the Bridge Authority Act, and all of these will incorporate a provision to allow for the transfer of surplus resources to the consolidated fund. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak briefly about the real property tax amnesty program that was initiated on March 1st, 2013. The purpose of this program is to allow property owners the opportunity to have their property assessed without any penalties. Additionally, the program seeks to allow property owners to bring their accounts current with opportunities available for significant savings. And in an effort to address as many accounts as possible, the program is divided into 4 segments. The first segment seeks to allow property owners with residential and commercial buildings who were not currently on the assessment list the opportunity to register their property without incurring any back taxes in respect of the years prior to the assessment. So if you have never been assessed, never gotten a bill, you can go into the property tax office, register yourself, and not be subject to any back taxes. Your bill will begin in this current year. This segment also encouraged self-registration of property owners, thereby encouraging many new accounts to be added to the assessment list. And Mr. Speaker, as of May 31st, 471 new accounts were created. 471 new properties were added to the assessment list, and a total of $1.1 million has been collected. The other 3 segments of the program seek to encourage property owners with arrears, or those who are current, the opportunity to settle any amounts due while providing savings for the taxpayer as a form of incentive. These 3 segments consist of the following. Where no more than 3 years of payment arrears exist, 50% of the total owed in both principal and surcharges is waived, providing full payment is made by June 30th, 2013. And as of May 31st, Mr. Speaker, a total of 415 such accounts were settled for total collections of $4.8 million. Where accumulated arrears for more than 3 years exist, 100% of surcharges only are waived, provided payment is made by December 31st, 2013. And as at May 31st, Mr. Speaker, 114 such accounts were settled for a total collection of $2.44 million. And to reward property owners, Mr. Speaker, to reward those property owners presently on the assessment list whose payment of property tax is current, a 5% rebate given for the tax year 2013, and this shall be continued to be offered each year for the next 2 years if they remain current. And as of May 31st, Mr. Speaker, 77 such accounts were settled for a total collection of $728,000. And so all told, Mr. Speaker, the real property tax amnesty program has therefore yielded some $9.1 million in additional revenue over the 3-month period from March to May 2013. Mr. Speaker, I would like to just encourage persons to continue to come forward, because this program runs until the 30th of June for individuals to come forward, and say to the public and to this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that as a result of this program so far, all of those individuals who have come forward and voluntarily registered themselves, from now on they will receive annual bills, and so we are increasing our tax base, Mr. Speaker. And there has been some criticism, Mr. Speaker. Some people say, well, why are you rewarding tax cheats? The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that over the years, this problem has grown to such an extent that we have not the manpower to go out and assess all of these people and not have it take just years to do. And so going forward, these persons will be receiving bills. There will be more of a follow-up after the bills are sent out in October. There will be more follow-up to ensure that we manage this delinquency better, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, we believe it has been a successful amnesty program, Mr. Speaker. Individuals can continue to come forward until the end of this month. And we believe it's been successful. We hearken again back to the road compensation program, where we assisted over 200, close to 250 businesses in bringing them relief in terms of microloans, electricity, national insurance, regularization, etc., Mr. Speaker. And so, you know, it's good to be able to reflect on some of your policy moves that where you can see immediate success. Because I tell you, Mr. Speaker, those where you don't see immediate success, other people remind you constantly, you know. So it's good to be able to say, come here and say, we did these things, and we believe it has been a success. But going forward, Mr. Speaker, we intend to make use of private sector expertise in going out and ensuring that our registers are as complete as possible. It is not our intention to overtax anybody, but we believe that if we are able to complete our rolls, our property tax rolls, our yield would be better, and we can even contemplate a time when we give everybody a reduction. Mr. Speaker, in 2013-2014, our revenues are projected at $1.503 million as compared to $1.38 billion this year. The GFS deficit next year is therefore expected to come in at $443 million, down $65 million from 2012-2013. That represents a sharp improvement, an improvement, Mr. Speaker, from 6.1% to 5.1% of GDP, and keeping us on track with our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. We wanted to get it down to 4.8, Mr. Speaker, but you know, sometimes you have to be flexible because we're trying to be conservative. We want to reach our target, but we have to be as conservative as possible and as realistic as possible, Mr. Speaker. As per that plan, our medium-term plan, Mr. Speaker, our approach to fiscal redress is measured and balanced. It's measured and balanced and designed to be compatible with the attainment of our other overriding economic and social objectives. Again, I return, Mr. Speaker, to the idea of a balanced approach phased in over a few years. And because of the responsible and reasoned approach of our plan, Mr. Speaker, there will be no need for the slashing and burning that can be so detrimental to our economy and to our society. Mr. Speaker, we have to act now to address the public finances so that we don't have to take more drastic measures in years to come. Mr. Speaker, we remain fully committed to pursuing the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan that we set out in February, and as such, in future years, recurrent expenditure will be allowed to grow in modest increments, such that its weight declines somewhat relative to the size of the economy. By 2016-2017, we expect it, talking about expenditure, to be down 1 full point from the current levels of 20.1%, to stand at 19.1% of GDP. Accordingly, we will actively reprioritize the expenditure allocations on an ongoing basis to ensure that they align as fully as possible with the core economic and social objectives set out in our Charter for Governance. And we have to do that, Mr. Speaker, because the needs of the country continue to evolve, and there might come a time very, very soon where we have to make a radical intervention to address some of the problems that affect us today, Mr. Speaker, and we might have to say to the public, to this Parliament, to the Bahamian people, to international observers, look, we have to make a radical intervention, and we need to source some money to be able to address some of the issues affecting in particular our young people in areas of delinquency and employment. Mr. Speaker, in the outer 3 years of our fiscal plan, we expect to keep capital expenditure at 3% of GDP, which is a level broadly consistent with past historical trends. And the crux of our fiscal strategy resides in getting the yield of our revenue system to a level more in keeping with both the needs of modern governance and the norm in the region. We need to raise the amount of revenue that we collect as a percentage of the size of our economy. And to that end, as we have said before, we have embarked on major modernization exercises in respect of the administration of our important revenue streams, namely customs and real property tax. We are also in the process of establishing a central revenue agency to bring together the administration of a number of taxes and thereby reap the efficiency benefits of economies of scale. We're going to centralize that, Mr. Speaker. The cornerstone of our enhancement strategy is the major tax reform package that we announced in February, featuring a new value-added tax. And through 2016-2017, tax reform, including the VAT, is expected to contribute just over 2% of the GDP. Mr. Speaker, modernization of real property tax should produce a 1 percentage point improvement. Administrative reforms to customs should contribute 0.5% to the revenue increase. We expect to severely curtail the smuggling of tobacco and yield some revenue from there, Mr. Speaker. And all told, tax and administrative reforms are expected to raise the revenue yield of our system by some 4 percentage points from GDP, from 17.4% 2013-2014 to 21.5% 2016-2017. That is how we derive this strategy when we say, Mr. Speaker, that in 2016-2017 we are looking to eliminate the recurrent deficit, not just because it sounds good, but because we have entrained a number of reforms. Each, over the next 4 years, will contribute in part to the raising of the revenue, and when combined with our monitoring our expenditure, we believe we can eliminate that gap, Mr. Speaker. That is how we derive. That is how we do it. So when we say we are seeking to eliminate the recurrent deficit by that time, it's not something you snatch out of the air. It's something we are actively working on, something that is multifaceted, where you get incremental gains from a number of initiatives. And when we put it all together, Mr. Speaker, we think we'll have a positive result. That is why we have confidence in being able to say, what we say, Mr. Speaker. And so, as the Minister of Finance and Right Honorable Prime Minister stressed in the budget communication, Mr. Speaker, the fiscal benefits of our medium-term plan are evident. We will eliminate the recurrent and GFS deficits by 2015-2016, and the cost of the government debt burden, as represented by the debt to equity, will be reversed, and the ratio will fall to roughly 50% in 2016-2017. Mr. Speaker, that will be down sharply from the 56.4% level expected this year, and off sharply by almost 20 points from the 70% level that would have prevailed if we had continued on the derelict fiscal course of our predecessors. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the major initiatives to transform government that we launched in the mid-year budget statement and that are further buttressed in this 2013-2014 budget communication. We intend to bring new procurement legislation, Mr. Speaker. The Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Bill 2013, when enacted, will bring the present rules surrounding government procurement, the way government buys, in line with international best practice and meet the country's obligations under the European Partnership Agreement with the European Union. There will be established within the Ministry of Finance a public procurement department headed by a chief procurement officer appointed by the Minister of Finance. The principal function of the department will be to ensure that the procurement is done in a fair and equitable manner. An independent appeals mechanism, a public procurement review tribunal, will also be created once the bill is enacted. The draft Financial Administration and Audit Public Procurement Regulations, which the Public Procurement Department will be charged with implementing, are comprehensive and consistent with procurement regulations internationally and in the Caribbean. Highlights of the regulations include providing for the constitution of the Procurement Review Tribunal and the appointments of its members, prescribing procurement entities and their functions, powers, and duties, providing for the procedures for complaints and appeals to the Review Tribunal, providing for any other matters necessary, Mr. Speaker, and, Mr. Speaker, following up on a commitment that we made, that this administration made in last year's budget. Section 57 of the regulations, upon coming into force, would prevent any procurement agency, which is defined as a ministry or department, a town committee under the Local Government Act, or any entity, including corporations in which the government owns more than 50% of shares. It will prohibit them, Mr. Speaker, from executing contracts once Parliament has been dissolved, and given that the contract has not yet come into force and has not been executed by all parties. This regulation allows the minister to waive this prohibition when a state of national emergency has been declared, Mr. Speaker. So when this legislation comes into force, we will no longer have to countenance a practice where the House has been resolved and up to the very day before, sometimes even on the day of election, contracts are being executed. Mr. Speaker, in addition, Section 58 mandates that the Public Procurement Board should use its best efforts to ensure that on an annual basis, at least 20% in value of all government procurement contracts are awarded to small businesses, which are defined as businesses with A, less than 25 employees, and B, owned by persons who are citizens of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, this is a comprehensive and needed reform. The present system is 40 years old and highly centralized with major gaps in coverage. For example, it does not cover public corporations which rely on tax revenues to cover their operations. Studies on procurement reform in other developing countries have shown that savings of up to 20% in the procurement of goods and services are possible. This initiative, Mr. Speaker, is consistent with the government's deficit reduction goals. As a result of the complexities of the current system, Mr. Speaker, we envisage a multi-year time frame for its full implementation after passage of the bill. Now, the bill and regulations are drafted to allow provisions to be brought in separately to accommodate a gradual implementation. Of course, Mr. Speaker, amongst the first steps would be an education campaign for entities and vendors, followed by the appointment of the Public Procurement Board. I want to say a few words about public sector pension reform, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Finance has engaged a company to prepare a report on the public sector pension system. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that the current system of pay-as-you-go pensions will impose an increasing burden on the public purse. In this year's budget, the allocation to pensions and gratuities of public officers is in excess of $85 million, and this amount is expected to grow at a faster rate than inflation in the medium term. The principle of the reform process, Mr. Speaker, is simple. The government would wish to improve coverage, as there are significant numbers of persons employed by the government who are not pensionable. The government would want to protect the benefits of today's workers, but at the same time manage more effectively the growth in the government's pension obligations. Mr. Speaker, future steps in the reform process will involve internal consultation before a formal presentation of the government on the options for reform. Mr. Speaker, again, tackling a major issue that has been left unaddressed for many years, being able to try and tackle this issue in a comprehensive manner sooner rather than later, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the new Customs Management Act is expected to be brought into force on the 1st of July. There are regulations which accompany the new Customs Management Act. In this budget, our processing fees are being introduced, new service charges, and the environmental levy. Again, Mr. Speaker, mostly cost recovery for the services that the department provides. The processing fee will be 1% of the value of entries submitted to customs, subject to a minimum of $10, which is currently charged, and capped to a maximum of $500. In addition, provision is made for a processing fee for manifest and other declarations for inbound and outbound aircraft. A few words on debt management, Mr. Speaker. One of the reforms underway at the Ministry of Finance is greater focus on debt and cash management to ensure that the government's borrowing operations do not become an impediment to growth. This initiative is in the form of a tripartite committee comprising the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, and the Treasury, and it has already yielded some beneficial results with an appreciable decline in the cost of short-term debt. The other area of focus is protecting the government on currency and interest rate risks, and work on these areas is ongoing. In the mid-year statement, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance indicated a focus on reducing costs in a number of areas, namely telecommunications, electricity, vehicles, and insurance. Work in these areas is well underway with the completion of telecommunications audits in several agencies, the completion of a mobile device policy to regulate the use and issuance of mobile devices in the public sector, and the launch of an initiative to begin the process of transforming the government's vehicle fleet to a lower-cost fleet. And I should say, Mr. Speaker, that in this regard, the government is of the considered view that its position as a large buyer should provide some appreciable benefits, Mr. Speaker. We're not just any other purchaser. And that's our story, Mr. Speaker. With respect to insurance, Mr. Speaker, the government is carefully reviewing the existing benefits and exploring ways to protect these benefits while ensuring an equitable price is paid, and we continue these discussions. With respect to electricity, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance will be launching in the new fiscal year tender exercises to retrofit government premises with the latest lighting technology, which would substantially reduce the cost of electricity for those premises. As the Minister of Finance indicated in the budget communication, the country's infrastructure needs cannot all be provided by the state. This has to be recognized, and as a result, the government has long partnered with quasi-government agencies such as the NIB and BEC in providing infrastructure, be it in government offices, clinics, or for Family Island electricity generation. The Ministry of Finance, in cooperation with other ministries, Mr. Speaker, is seeking to expand the range of available partners for national development to include the private sector and the types of projects for financing. In this regard, the ministry will be developing a framework for private-public sector partnership with a focus on investments in the areas of education, health, and general administration. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, that if executed efficiently, this could stimulate job creation and lead to lower operating costs for the government. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said, we are committed to implementing national health insurance during this mandate, and we are currently reviewing in detail all aspects of such a plan. We continue to tackle the crime issue, and resources are being made available in this budget to so do. Mr. Speaker, one highlight is the 5-year program worth approximately $175 million to modernize the marine fleet and harbor facilities of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, as well as investments in other equipment for the police and increase in manpower for the Defense Force, Police Force, and Department of Immigration. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to mention that $10 million has been allocated in the capital budget of the Ministry of Works and Urban Development for small home repair. Mr. Speaker, this program would be overseen by a committee, Mr. Speaker, We believe that this program would lead to significant job creation and improve the living standards for disadvantaged persons, and thereby, Mr. Speaker, we believe that this program will contribute to tackling some of the root causes of what we are experiencing today, some of the social problems, Mr. Speaker. Through the country strategy agreed with the Caribbean Development Bank, Mr. Speaker, $30 million will be mostly allocated to education, especially special education, and transforming the College of the Bahamas to university status. It was mentioned in the communication, and I'm sure it will be elaborated on, Mr. Speaker, significant sums of money to construct new primary and secondary schools in Inagua and Salvador, Eleuthera, and Andros. Other renovations of, for example, the Our Lady's School to accommodate 100 special needs students, Mr. Speaker, the construction of new educational and multi-purpose facility, facility for persons with special needs. We will pursue the construction of the 2 mini hospitals beginning in South Eleuthera and in Kidd Island, Mr. Speaker. We expect to get our housing program into full gear beginning in this fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, and we have committed to spend over $4 million on the new School of Agriculture and Marine Sciences in North Andros, Mr. Speaker. And so the government, Mr. Speaker, remains a participant in the economy, Mr. Speaker. All of these that I have just listed, and that will be elaborated on by respective ministers, Mr. Speaker, will contribute to employment creation and growth of the Bahamian economy, Mr. Speaker. And when combined with the incentive legislation, i.e. the extension of the Family Island Encouragement Development Act, the City of Nassau Revitalization Act, Mr. Speaker, and the extension of the exemption on stamp tax for first-time home buyers. All of these, we believe, Mr. Speaker, will incentivize economic activity and lead to economic growth, Mr. Speaker. And so I wanted to spend that time, Mr. Speaker, informing this Parliament, and by extension, the Bahamian people, of our plan, which is a multifaceted plan, which is a multi-year plan, where we make gradual adjustments in a number of areas. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, that if we are faithful to that plan, we will reap the benefits, the main one of which is to secure a solid economic foundation for this country. And from that foundation, Mr. Speaker, we are able to build our economy, we're able to build on the services that we need to provide for our people. And so, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I would return to a crucial point made by the Right Honourable Prime Minister made in the communication last week. And that point is, Mr. Speaker, that we are involved in generational change. At no time in recent memory has our small nation and its government been enveloped in so much fundamental, deep-rooted, and vitally important change. Indeed, we are in the process of remaking government in this country. We are striving to create modern governance and an effective, efficient, and responsive administration of public services. We are building a solid fiscal foundation to support government in a sustainable way. We are beginning to lay the groundwork for stronger growth and job creation. All of these things, Mr. Speaker, will support our ongoing efforts to enhance the health, prosperity, and security of Bahamian society and thereby secure the future for all Bahamians. Our agenda, Mr. Speaker, is full, but it is balanced and it is measured. All of its constituent components are mutually complementary and supportive. Our plan meets the needs of Bahamians, and they have given us the mandate to deliver on it. The 2013-2014 budget, Mr. Speaker, attests to our commitment, and indeed it attests to our ability to do so. And so, Mr. Speaker, I take great pride to move for second reading and committal of a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2013 and ending 30th of June 2014. I so move.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Do we have a seconder? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Fox Hill.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to start by joining with the sentiments of the Member Parliament for Golden Isles in connection with the passing of Ehud Cunningham, who was a public servant who was involved as the financial secretary in drawing up last year's budget and unfortunately passed away a short time ago. And so I want to extend condolences on behalf of my constituents to his family on his untimely passing, and to pay tribute to his contribution to the conduct of the public life of the Bahamas. Secondly, I want to recognize in our gallery, if I might, Mr. Speaker, the presence of the Honorary Consul for the Bahamas, Dr. Monica Davis, in Trinidad and Tobago. She represents our interest in Trinidad and Tobago. She's sitting there with the Foreign Officer, Joy Newbold. Monica happens to be my classmate from St. Augustine's. We graduated in way back in 1970, but she doesn't look it. Looks great. And of course, we have another SAC man across the way here with the Member of Parliament for St. Anne's. And I think we should also extend to her condolences because her mother passed away, which is the reason she's here, and she was buried yesterday at St. Anselm's Church. She, of course, was a significant contributor to the development of medicine here in the Bahamas, worked with our former Prime Minister when he was the Minister of Health and National Insurance, and she lived to be 92 years of age. So a good innings, and so our condolences to her on her passing. In making this intervention this morning, I want to first pay tribute to the political team at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, the Parliamentary Secretary, the Member of Parliament for South Beach, and the Member of Parliament for South Andros, who is also the High Commissioner for the Bahamas to the CARICOM countries. And we also have in new leadership at the public service level the Permanent Secretary, Philip Miller. And I say this without fear of contradiction. It makes a big difference when you have a loyal team that helps you with your work, because you can depend implicitly on those people and what they do and what they execute on behalf of the Bahamas government, that we have the honor and privilege to superintend for this time being. And so I want to thank them for their loyalty and support and leadership of the team which the Prime Minister has appointed to do the work that we do at the Ministry. It is my privilege, of course, to second this resolution this morning. And in doing so, I firstly support my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Golden Isles. It's an honor to support the budget statement of the government and to speak to some of the issues which arise particularly in connection with the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration. Just a bit of personal history. In 1988, I had the privilege of working as a lecturer for one semester at the College of the Bahamas. I substituted for Felix Bethel as the lecturer in politics and government at COB, and that class had many, many bright people in it. But two people stand out today for these purposes. One is Reynard Rigby, who is the former chairman of the PLP, and the other is the honorable gentleman who moved this motion this morning. I say this many times when I speak to younger audiences, how prepared they should be to take over because time passes very quickly. And I always remember my first day at St. Augustine's in 1965, Robert Cartwright and I sitting outside on the bench, and we said to ourselves, we're going to be in this school for 5 years. Can you imagine that? 5 years in the school. And now, it's been 40 years since I left it. So, time passes very quickly. And I point out, Mr. Speaker, how from 1988 to his election as the MP for Golden Isles in 2002, 12 years had passed from that time in class in 1988 to the day he got elected to office. 12 years. So in 12 short years, he had gone from a student in school to a member of Parliament and a parliamentary secretary, and now the Minister of State. And it's an open secret that when I was talking about his running as a candidate back in 2002 for us, I described him to the then leader of the opposition as the smartest man I knew. And I believe the Right Honourable Prime Minister adopted that description. I think he was quite shocked at it. And time has proven us both correct. There's no doubt then that congratulations are in order for a job well done in shepherding the day-to-day responsibilities at a political level for what was presented by the Right Honourable Prime Minister last week in this House. And I therefore use that example again today of how he was able to progress from a student at COB to what he is today, and we are all unanimously proud of him. Mr. Speaker, this budget is about the future. For me, it is about the election of 2017 and what we will do to win. In a sense, my eyes are more fully trained on the future than on the present. I'm trying to work on those people who will vote for us for the first time 4 years from today. They are today's 14-year-olds. And I know from experience that the election we fought in 2012 was markedly different from any other election that I had participated in or fought before. The internet had intervened and had changed the whole landscape of how people interacted with voters. The question for me then is today, what will be on the minds of today's 14-year-olds when the election comes around in 2017? What's going to be on their minds? What is on their minds? And so the budget for me has its focus on the future. It makes the hard decisions in order for us to have a future in 2017. I've made no secret about this. I do not want to retire as an opposition politician. I want to retire in the government. And I want to retire with a comfortable life, knowing that I contributed to doing the best for the country and that the country will ensure that I continue to prosper with respect and dignity while I'm no longer actively involved in public policy. Now, you will note over the past year, I've spoken many times and in fact moved a resolution to support a select committee request to review the benefits and allowances of members of Parliament. And it is regrettable that the work of the committee has not yet reported to the House, though it is largely finished. I had anticipated that our work would have led to some changes in this budget which would have buttressed and supported the work of members of Parliament. I'm advised that this is likely to come following the committee's report. However, I wish to say, Mr. Speaker, at this juncture to all the ones who are here and who have longer to stay here than I have to stay here, that this is an issue, the support of members of Parliament is an issue that must be fixed. It is imperative for us to fix it. The PLP has to fix it. We come from the poor and the dispossessed. The party of the wealthy business class has no interest in fixing it. They have no interest in fixing it. We must, to quote the late Sir Lyndon Pindling, continue to make it possible for men and women of modest means to be able to serve in this place. And I have two enduring memories of public figures who were no longer in office that causes me to say this. One is the former Minister of Education and Member of Parliament for Exuma, who fell ill and presented at the Princess Margaret Hospital, and no one remembered who he was and was not treated with the appropriate level of respect until someone intervened. And another time, I remember the late Governor General Sir Gerald Cash standing on a line in the public treasury after he had left office as Governor General for 10 years. And he had to identify himself as a living pensioner. This should not happen. The House of Assembly, the legislature, the Parliament should be an exclusive club that when you have departed, your dignity is protected in all its aspects. Yes. Now, the group opposite, when headed by their former leader, had the opportunity to do so. But what they did was they fixed up their leader. Yeah. So he is straight and no one else is straight.
That's right.
They couldn't do nothing. That's
true. Which brings me to the point which was raised in an editorial which appeared on the 30th of May this year in the Nassau Guardian under the headline, "Thank you, Hubert Ingram."
Thank you, my friend.
And the editorial went on to heap the most fulsome, effusive praise on the former Prime Minister. I respectfully disagree with everything that they had to say in that editorial. It was one load of nonsense writing by some worthless sycophant with a critical eye to God knows what. I say this in the context of how the press treated the budget and the question of whether there's balance when it comes to the PLP.
Sharon Taylor wrote it.
Notice, I didn't complain about the bias, you know, and this is an important point to me. I didn't complain about the bias. As I explained to one of the reporters on Guardian Radio, it is clear that there's bias against the PLP. That much is not in doubt. The question is, what about balance? Not bias, but balance. So, in an effort, Mr. Speaker, to balance the equation, we have for the second year in a row continued a practice which we started when in opposition, which is to provide a narrative for the press as to how we see the budget statement. So, this was led by the Honorable Minister of State. And as soon as he was finished reading the statement, and there was sometimes for question, the person who we think authored the article, that particular editorial, left with great dispatch. There was a wind behind him. And that seemed like contempt for the whole exercise. Not even a pretense. Just contempt. So, the editorial about praise for Hubert Ingram indicates a hankering back to an era that will never return.
Never.
Never return.
Not even minutes would agree with
Well, in fact, he was the one who pronounced the end of the Ingram era. Yes.
We joined with you.
And we're suffering ever since.
It was an era of boorishness, insensitivity, packing people without mercy from their jobs in the public service, selling off the national patrimony. And what is particularly galling is not that they did not write an edit, not the fact that they wrote an editorial, you know, not writing an editorial saying, for example, thank you to the Member of Parliament for Centerville. They should have had at least one of them for turning the corner on this unholy mess in which the former Prime Minister left us. But the praise of the former Prime Minister now is coming from an organization, an institution, a commercial entity, which the former Prime Minister himself described as led by two men who were, in his words, too damn greedy. That's what he described them as. The owners of the Guardian. Yeah. Said they're too damn greedy. That's how he described them. Yet, the Nassau Guardian says, thank you to Hubert Ingram. I mean, this is incredible. And congratulates the boorishness as leadership. They really are suckers for punishment. You know, Eileen Karen of the Tribune, who is simply pathological when it comes to her hatred of the PLP, you can understand this. But the Guardian, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. You know, Mrs. Karen just can't help herself. So you just roll your eyes when she writes something. But for young, educated Bahamians, such as those who work at the Nassau Guardian, that's a whole nother story again. Whole other story again. Anyway, I say to the Nassau Guardian what the lawyers say. Audi alterum partem. What does that mean? Audi, Audi alterum partem.
That's balance.
Hear the other side.
Yeah.
Hear the other side. How about the fact the man who they're praising, sold a well-working telephone company, fully manned by trained Bahamians, who could have bought it and run it themselves, sold it to a group of people who are not Bahamian, who don't seem to have a clue what they're doing. They're raking in profits at the expense of the quality of service, whose mantra now is the telephone message, the party you are trying to reach is not now available, who gave away the national patrimony at a fire sale price, and we are to say thank you to him. Have they taken leave of their senses? How quickly do we forget? And I know that the people of Fox Hill will not forget, Mr. Speaker, how we were notified that within less than 30 days, the same phone company that was sold proposes to move their facility in Fox Hill, close it down, one supposes, in the name of profits. So the end of June, something that I fought for as a member of Parliament to be brought back when BTC was BTC, or Batelco, to bring service to the people of Fox Hill. These people with no conscience, no history or context to this place, going to close it down by the 30th of June. They are bloody disgrace. That's what they are. It is rapacious, it is unseemly, it is wrong, it is unforgivable. The Roman Catholic Church, Mr. Speaker, has a doctrine, has something to say about this kind of behavior. And the last Pope, Benedict XVI, in his encyclical on integral human development in charity and truth, wrote this: economic activity cannot solve all social problems through the simple application of commercial logic. This needs to be directed toward the pursuit of the common good, for which the political community in particular must also take responsibility. Therefore, it must be borne in mind that grave imbalances are produced when economic action conceived merely as an engine for wealth creation is detached from political action conceived as a means for pursuing justice through redistribution. And Pope John Paul, his predecessor, defined the common good as the good of all and each individual, because we are really responsible for all. And I would really recommend to both the Nassau Guardian and this telephone company, it is the common good, or what the Anglicans call building up the common life. So I will not say thank you to Hubert Ingram. I will simply say thank you for seeing the end of him in public life. Our image of ourselves, that is, the PLP and how we work, is portrayed to the public, is something that we depend upon the press to do. We have a responsibility to manage, to some extent, how information is shared. We have a lot to do in this area in building up the relationships to ensure that our message gets equal time. It is critical going forward that the nation hears our voices and not filtered through someone's interpretive biases. It is easier than ever to do that given today's technology. And I will show you the nature of the problem. One writer on Facebook described their own experience with the way the media deals with the PLP's message. Here's what they said on Facebook. Chairman of BEC, Leslie Miller, announced today his plans to put 7,000 Bahamians without power supply back on the BEC grid. But before the chairman could speak a word, NB12 had the former defeated minister for BEC, Fenton No More Nemore, in the newscast. When are we going to hear the plans of the new government if every time the news comes on, these ghosts and holograms of the past, who plunged thousands into darkness, are still getting all the airtime on national radio and TV? Boy, I tell you, the man who was giving out free light bulbs when people's lights were off didn't have a plan in place to restore power Bahamians for 5 years. You think he got one now? Say, give Potcake Miller the mic, and let's hear the plan for the newly elected government, please. Yeah. So, and then you have them running off and saying the government, after last year, they violated the law by paying ministers of state $66,000, and it wasn't true, and it wasn't true, but nobody, simply called the minister and say, well, is this true or is this not true? He had to go and issue his own statement to say, well, here are the facts. The facts is the government did not break the law. The government did pay the $60,000. It'll be reflected the way the budget is drawn up. It'll be reflected in the different columns next year when you see the actual expenditure. But, never let the truth interfere with a good story. Always put 2 and 2 together and make it 5 if it sounds good. Yes. It's the new math. And, I've been out of school a long time, as you know. I believe the work in this area of information management will evidence itself in the budgetary allocations for the Bahamas Information Services. But the party machinery itself should be equipped and supported by the state in order to carry out its critical work. So that is my focus, trying to fix this problem so that the PLP will have a better than fighting chance in 2017. To do that, we have to fix this economy. And the resources allocated to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Immigration under my tutelage for the time being will be utilized to do just that, to make its contribution toward fixing this economy so the PLP can win the election in 2017. Yeah. When I was 18 years old, I was having a chat with Lyndon Pinling in his office, and I was railing against the fact, as young people do, that MPs had to give out hams and turkeys at Christmas time. I told him, when was that going to stop? And he looked quite bemused, and he said to me, not in my lifetime, maybe in yours. So today I'm standing here and talking to the younger ones and saying the same thing to them. Not in my lifetime, maybe in yours. The problem is the problem I find in this milieu is that the common good hardly exists, Mr. Speaker. There's just plain partisan politics. And while I like a good old-fashioned trashing fight in politics, there has to be some common good, a point beyond which we do not go because it injures the common good. Now, the Prime Minister said in his budget communication the following, and I quote, "My government continues to emphasize its commitment to higher educational standards and better outcomes, as well as more effective skills training, all of which are also vitally important to the future. My government has allocated, in the context of the country's strategy agreed with the Caribbean Development Bank, over $30 million for education, and this will be primarily directed towards special education and the transition of the College of the Bahamas to university status." In this budget, he continues, "My government is also allocating $5.5 million of our own resources to the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in 2013 and 14 for the construction of new primary and secondary schools in Inagua, San Salvador, Gregorytown, and Low Sound. That is more than double the amount allocated last year and a virtual tripling of the sums allocated in 2011-2012. We will maintain and expand these investments into the future." First point, remember all this noise about PLPs cutting back and we promised to double the investment and what we're doing? So what is this telling you now? What is it telling you? Promise kept. We're moving inexorably 1 year at a time on the way.
In 1 year? Education and training.
Ah, boy. I recall the story of the speech given by the former Secretary General Kofi Annan at a conference I attended in 2006 in Vienna. And he warned us, Mr. Speaker, of the need to have specific set-asides for young people. And that's what this budget is doing. It is investing in young people. Those same people that I said going to vote for us or be called upon to vote for us in 4 years' time, who are 14 years old today, seeking to improve those dreadful statistics that say 30% of the people under 25 are out of a job. That is simply unsustainable. And we're doing better than some other countries because Spain is now 60% of the people under 25 in Spain are unemployed. How do you sustain that? The difficulty in part is lack of skills. So the investment in training and education is the answer.
Yes.
And it's not their fault that they come out of school without the skills. Even greater than that, they don't appear, in some cases, to have the means to comprehend their deficiencies and how they can correct them. You know, Mr. Speaker, I talk with the Member of Parliament for Elizabeth quite often about this. The other day, we always get this, you know, I need a job. MPs have to find jobs, and so you go to a great extent, you find the job, and, you know, the contractor who was talking to me said, send me the name, you know, tell me in order of priority who should be hired. I said, fine, this is the fellow. Fine. So, good, it's all set. Gets his documents in and all the rest of it. I get a text message back the next morning saying, you think you could find me a job a little closer to where I live? It says, this one is quite far away, and I've got to be on the job at 7 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, it's difficult for me to get there at 7 o'clock. So I showed several of the members in here the text because I really couldn't believe it. So there's a lot of work we have to do. A lot of work we have to do. And because it's not there, I mean, given the breakdown in families and all the rest of it, the support isn't there. We have to do it for them, and the budget is therefore designed to do just that. It's education and training. So training to make you properly equipped to join the workforce, what it means to get to work on time, and how the conduct of your life when you're working on a job. Resources and training so we don't have to issue all these work permits that people are asking for to do the most mundane tasks. Again, it shocks me sometimes how unsympathetic so many of our business people are, both domestic and foreign, about this stark reality that their profits in this country will only continue to come if there is social peace. They, therefore, have a stake in making sure that the Bahamas and the Bahamian people have work. Otherwise, their investments are doomed, absolutely doomed. And I say this to Emera in Freeport, the Grand Bahama Shipyard, to Club Fortuna, to Quality Services, who just don't seem to get it. And Bahamas should take stock as well here in Nassau. You have to have a stake. You have a stake in making sure there's social peace in this country. You can't have people looking outside the fence, seeing people doing these jobs that they figure, well, I could do that. I actually had someone from immigration call up the Grand Bahama Shipyard this morning. I was telling the Minister for Grand Bahama, because of a report on the television last night where Bahamian employees are complaining that they're sandblasters and they've been laid off. And they see foreign nationals continue to work. The company's explanation is that these people are contract workers, and the job they were working on came to an end, but fortunately a new job came in overnight, and some of them, they say, have been rehired. So we'll see. But what I want to do is to make sure, I'm making sure that these companies get the message and that we keep monitoring what they're doing to hold them to account.
Yes.
Recently, I was sharing with the Minister for Trade my experience in Qatar, where Middle Eastern countries were having a seminar on their economies. And they say they have to create 50 million jobs by the year 2050. 50 million jobs. They spoke about the fact that the school system does not prepare people for working for themselves, and the only way they can meet their goals, they think, is by entrepreneurship. So they're saying, and this applies to our school systems as well, because the interesting thing about it was one of the people on the panel started talking about the wonders of junior achievement in Egypt, saying how this had transformed in many ways the culture of young people preparing themselves for working for themselves. Because many of these economies have concluded that they're not going to be able to generate the jobs in the traditional way. So people have to create jobs for themselves. They have to invent new businesses. They must have access to capital. And I shared this experience with the Minister of Trade, and he remarked how he had come to the same conclusion, and that for the young people in his area, he had brought in Mark Turnquest, the Minister for Trade, meaning the Member of Parliament for Elizabeth. He had brought in Mark Turnquestism, who held a seminar, and he was surprised at the volume of people who showed up to the seminar. And he said some of the toughest guys off the streets were sitting in that seminar, something they had to pay to come to. It's about 100 people, who turned up. Showed up, listening, hungry for information. So it's now our time to do our part, because part of it, of course, is providing the capital for them to go further once they have the idea and to be able to develop their ideas. So people want to learn, and they want to work, and they want to be engaged. So government must use its resources to facilitate that. And there's still too much today of what is happening, and I would share, Mr. Speaker, a letter which was written to me just yesterday. One of a number of these letters, I'm sure members of Parliament get them all the time, says, "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. Mommy approached us, my siblings and I, telling us that she met with the bank yesterday and that they told her we're in jeopardy of losing the house due to the mortgage being behind. I took her to the bank not knowing what this appointment was about. I know I asked you times before to help with employment, but now it's more important and serious. The job pays less than $1,100 that I have per month. If you can recall, I have a Bank of the Bahamas, Commonwealth Bank, and school fees to pay, so I'm literally left with nothing. My debt exceeds my current monthly salary by a lot, and I even have a balance at COB. I really need your help and/or referral at getting a greater paying job to help with the mortgage and school and other loans I have. I'm graduating in the spring 2014, so I really need a job and a much better paying one. The work I do is great, but I have bills. I don't want to lose my house, so please help. And you get this many times. Many times. And I want to, at least in the first instance, express empathy and sympathy with this position, because I can't fix it. I can't fix them all or fix the problem, except to apply the general policies that we're trying to do now in the hope that sooner or later this thing turns around. But you can't, people think that because, you dress up in suit today, that this is how it's always been. But it's not always been this way. So I understand entirely. I understand. When I left high school in 1970, my old man lost his job. And he was out of a job for 2 years. 2 years, nothing. I remember him telling me how he spent his last $1,000 to pay my school fees to go overseas. 2 years. And I know the pressure that I put on my parents' marriage, their family life. I was talking to a young man the other day who's a contractor. And he's standing up asking me again, is there any work? He's living with his in-laws because he's been without work. And he said the marriage is about to break up. He said he used to hear people say that money used to make a difference in marriages, but he never believed it because he thought it was love and, But he just said, I guess there is love. There's no question about that. But he said it just amazed him how the personality of his wife changed so entirely once there was no income coming in. So I can understand the enormous pressures which are on people because of this unemployment situation, and why in this budget the government's priority is fixing this economic problem, because so many things will follow behind that if we get that right, and we plan to get it right. We plan to get it right. The bottom line for this purpose then is young people must be put to work. And when you see the problems which are faced with this, amongst them, when you find jobs for young people, what I found in so many cases is, first of all, it's a very expensive exercise in this country to apply for a job. The photos, the police certificate, the medical certificate, and you have to prove that you're Bahamian. So the next problem is so many people have not registered their births. Their parents haven't registered their births. Their name is one name, their father's name is another name, their mother's name is another name, and no one could did we register? No, we didn't, so on and so forth. And then a passport costs $50. And these days, no one is accepting your voter's card. They won't accept your driver's license. You got to have a passport. So If your birth isn't registered, that means you got to go get an affidavit done. So that's, you got to pay someone to draw up the affidavit, then you've got to go and register the affidavit, and yeah, just on and on and on and on. Yes, right, the search card at the hospital. And if you don't find that, then you're stuck. Because the registrar won't register it until you got the pink card from the hospital. So MPs have to help with those things as well. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want us to pay attention in this budget to what we're doing in sports and culture.
Yes, please.
The PLP negotiated that stadium, the Thomas A. Robinson Stadium, under the Right Honorable Member of Parliament for Centerville, as a gift to the young people of the Bahamas.
Yes, yes.
And it's a superb gift. The Prime Minister recently had the opportunity to thank in person the President of China for the gift when he met with him in Port of Spain, Trinidad. And as you know from the news, the President of China offered an additional grant of some $8 million US for various projects. And the Chinese also have on offer $1 billion for lending at concessionary terms for the whole Caribbean region over 20 years at 2% interest. And I see where the Deputy Leader of the FNM is naysaying the borrowing, but the first thing is the Prime Minister did not commit this country to any specific borrowing. But if there is to be development and there is cheap money available, why not? Particularly when our traditional friends are telling us that they're not supporting lending us money anymore. Recently, the Canadian government abstained at the Caribbean Development Bank meeting to support our country program, the same program that the Prime Minister talked about. The Canadians abstained. Didn't tell us why, but we understand something to do with problems with our GDP per capita. Concessionary lending is right now prohibited by the World Bank, for example, to the Bahamas because our GDP per capita is too high.
Which is skewed. That's right.
And we're really tired of pointing out to them what the problem is with this measure. And I'll put it in simple terms. I think I'm told it's called the Robinson Crusoe syndrome. If you have two men on an island, one worth $1 billion and the other worth $1, what is the GDP per capita on that island?
$500,000.
One is worth, exactly, $500,000 is the answer. So they're saying the GDP per capita on that island of two people where there's $1 billion of income, the GDP per capita is $500,000. Half a billion. Except that one only makes $1 and the other makes $1 billion.
And 50 cents.
And 50 cents. Right. Yeah. So that's the problem with that measure. That's the problem with that measure. It's not a true measure of the wealth of the island and the people in it. So our foreign policy then is to be fine-tuned with the sum of $24,912,000 allocated for this fiscal year, down some $495,778 from the $25,408,122 that was allocated to us last year. And we're going to make it our business to find more money for this country over the next year.
Yes.
That's our business. I said the general rubric is to make the policy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the aim of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is to ensure that there's a seamless passage of Bahamians around the world, whether for business or tourism, whatever. That's what our job is, principal job is. But connected to this has to also be now the mission of finding capital for the Bahamas. And so over the next year or so, there'll be substantial time spent in the Middle East and Asia doing just that, trying to find and search for new sources of funding for this country, new sources of investment. It is critical that we do so, as the traditional markets and sources appear to be challenged. This does not mean abandoning our traditional friends. But in a time when our country is capital starved and there is excess capital in areas of the world outside our normal sphere of influence, it would be foolhardy not for us to search. I've spoken to my branch executive to help them appreciate and understand the nature of what I'm about to embark. It is critical to whether we win this next election, and I will be depending on the mechanisms that I put in place to support my work while engaged in the foreign affairs work that I've been assigned to do. It's not without considerable risks for me politically, but I believe it is for the better good. I was told a story the other day, Mr. Speaker, of a young man who at 17 in the United Kingdom invented a new app and became an instant millionaire. And there, a group of Bahamians, young people, were enthusing justifiably over this accomplishment. However, I think that we in this region have forgotten that we have our own app inventors. Who can forget Usain Bolt, who runs the fastest in the world and now makes an estimated $20 million US from his talent? Our kids who have won gold medals, Chris Brown and Demetrius Pinder, can do the same thing. And so, the investment by the PLP in sports and culture will be critical also to solving the issue of youth unemployment. I'm sorry? Yes, yeah. I mean, Chris Gale, who's a cricketer, is playing in India. It's the biggest cricket league. And the Right Honourable Member is saying that Jamaica has players, soccer players all over the world. And we see what they've done in music with Bob Marley. So our musicians, our sports people, you know, they can do the same thing. That's why, you know, when the kids are learning the music at Urban Renewal, they're learning the music because it gives them a skill that they can turn into something that makes a living for themselves.
That's right.
And then the issue of government contracts, using government contracts to young people and using the government to empower people is key to tackling youth unemployment. So my number one focus is to get these young men and women into the workforce. You know, I told someone, I stepped out of high school, you know, and my mom, she didn't play. You know, she was Dow Rose secretary. She just called up someone and said, I need my boy to go to work. So I stepped out of high school and went to work as a messenger in the Tourist News Bureau, and I have never been without a job from that day to this. And yet, I think that is the common experience of many people here.
You started as a messenger?
As a messenger, yeah. For the Bahamas Tourist News Bureau, which was then a part of the ministry. And yet, I meet people today, some of them 23 years old, who have never held a 9-to-5 job in their lives. And it makes a difference. That 9-to-5 business makes a difference. Regularity makes a difference. It's a discipline. It's the commitments, you know, the belonging to something all makes a difference. So that's what this budget is designed to get at. You know, to give the support to these young people to say, this is a country that you can commit yourself to because the country is going to provide the economic benefits for you and your families to survive in. That's us. That's us.
That's us.
And so immigration policy is going to be used to force this issue if the business sector will not get with the program. And so I'm asking them, get with the program. Get with the program. And what's also important for us is for the parliamentary colleagues not to go wobbly on immigration, because the usual suspects are out there making noise about this policy. It's the right policy. It's the right policy. Let them bray if they will, but also let them conform. It's important that we speak in one voice in this Parliament on this matter. Bahamians first.
That's right.
And there are no exceptions. I'm looking forward to the day, way down the road, Mr. Speaker, when this will be a country of 750,000 people. Nassau being a city of 500,000 people. And to do that, there will have to be rapid infrastructural development, planning, new rules of social behavior, and plenty of new capital. That then must be our, what then is our next big project? You know, the airport is now winding down. The hotel is almost built. And we know that construction actually drives spending. You just have to see it in Abaco at Baker's Bay, man. I mean, these guys, when they get paid on Friday, you know, Brother Davis's bar is having a, it's full there in Marsh Harbor, spilling over. And their wives and girlfriends get their part of the pay packet, and they go and spend. So that's what we're trying to do. What is the next big project? And so if our friends, the Chinese, can provide the cheap capital, and the Americans have indicated no issue with this at all. You know, we had the meeting with Joe Biden. Prime Minister met Joe Biden down in Port of Spain. He said, God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. That's right. That's right. In the foreign policy area, our relations remain good with all countries. And I'm pleased to announce that the Prime Minister has advised the Governor General of the appointment of a new honorary counsel, a new Consul General for New York. He is the customs broker and columnist Forrester Carroll. And Mr. Carroll will take up his appointment on the 1st of July. And I wish to congratulate him and wish him every success in his work there. Prime Minister has also directed the appointment of Marilyn Zonical, the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to be designated an ambassador at large. This is a well-deserved honor. And particularly since she's a Valley girl, I wish to offer my congratulations to her as she continues to do her work for and behalf of this country. We are in the process of undergoing significant changes in the way we do our work at the ministry, which will require movement of personnel in the coming weeks. There will not likely be any further specific announcement about these, save when the circumstances dictate. All the required clearances are in place, and I hope to be able to say something more definitive about our structural changes by the 1st of July. The idea is to make the ministry more relevant to the constituencies it serves and more adaptive to the wishes of the government and to its minister. I recall in this connection my conversation with the late Prime Minister and national hero of Jamaica, Michael Manley, who, when he lost office, said that one of the issues that his government faced was that the public administration during his time sagged under the weight of activities and changes which the government proposed. I think of this often as we try to make the ministry more adaptive to a rapid and less deliberative response when actions are placed before it. Critical, in my view, is the need for officers to understand that they are in the business of serving the public and should respond and adapt to the phrase, the customer is always right. One thing I still don't understand is how is it possible to work at a high level in a public agency, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and not know what is in the press for that day, even at 12 o'clock in the day? I can't figure that out. And maybe this goes back to the days at SAC and Paul Christopher was telling us in history class, you got to read the newspapers every day. and it's a hard habit to break. But I think we have a loyal team and loyal leadership in the ministry. We have the authority to hire additional staff, and the complements in protocol and foreign service officers should be increased within the coming weeks. The foreign service orders have now been drafted and are before the cabinet for approval. Subject to that approval, the orders are to come into effect on the 1st of July, 2014. The orders will include the award of foreign service medals for those who have given extraordinary service to the ministry. It will be, for the first time, create a foreign service with rules that are separate from the public service. We continue to have serious challenges in this area of the lack of understanding by the public service of what foreign service officers do and the ranks which they require to carry out their jobs with the requisite allowances. We continue to be unable to keep foreign service officers in post because of the inability to compete with the private sector in wages and allowances. Key to our foreign policy will be the continued management of the relationship with the United States of America, our closest trading partner and ally. The relationship is a complex one. Our interests are similar, but not the same. We live in an American hemisphere. We live in an American hemisphere. And we live in an American culture. And yet, we have our separate juridical and cultural identity. We are small, and they are large. And I often quote, in aid and comfort of an understanding of this, something that former Governor General Arthur Hanna said to the delegate from South Korea when he was presenting his credentials. He said, you know, Bahamas and South Korea are similar in that we are nestled next to giants, and our independence is only as much as the giants allow. So we are small, and they are large. And that's not often understood by all. I just concluded discussions with the American authorities about our concerns with regard to the gun violence which is wreaking havoc on our streets, for example, and what further steps can be taken by them to assist in stopping this violence. It is a matter which plagues their society as well. We have a stake in making sure that our views are heard on this and other issues, and we welcome the fact that the United States has announced that they will sign the Small Arms Treaty of the United Nations as a first step in tracking how manufactured weapons make their way from the U.S. to jurisdictions such as ours. I explained to the Canadian minister who visited the other day, speaking to the issues that she raised, that sometimes we get the impression that our traditional partners take us for granted. Our concerns for visa-free access to the United States continue to be addressed. We believe that the Bahamas should be a country whose citizens can enter the United States visa-free. We continue to express our concerns about what appears to be arbitrary decisions made to deny Bahamians visas to visit the United States. Most of these are addressed satisfactorily, and we continue to have a good working relationship with embassy personnel here. We've also raised the issue of processing of visas with the Canadian government for students as well. And they have promised some review and improvements on that issue. And I want to thank John Dinkelman, who's the Charge of the United States of America, for his work here with us. Just to touch briefly on the immigration budget, please make note of some of the following. It appears that there'll be an apparent decrease in the budget for trainee immigration officers, and that amount is listed as year on year minus $2,585,550 at head 30 post 9 at page 190 of the revenue estimates. What I'm advised is we already have permission to hire 100 officers, and most of the processing is done on that for this fiscal year, and those are carried over into next year. but the allocation for the 60 additional hires for next year has actually been taken from the Department of Immigration's budget, and it's placed in the Ministry of Finance. So, opposition spokesman, you'll find that that's where, my advice is that that is where the emoluments will now, all new appointments will now be found in the Ministry of Finance. Yes, I knew. So I tried to do your work for you. Yeah. And they're to be hired at $18,000 per annum. So the Ministry of Finance has advised us that under their new policy, this along with all other capital purchases were taken out of our budget and placed in a global capital pool in the finance budget. And this will also deal with the issues of weapons, ammunition, cars, equipment. All of that will come out of the Ministry of Finance budget. To access this, the department will again have to request approval from the Ministry of Finance, and the other capital items removed from the budget and now in the Ministry of Finance's budget will be the rebuilding of the dorms of the detention center, vehicles and arms and ammunition. Those are all in the Ministry of Finance's budget. The items listed by me account largely for the apparent decrease in the total overall allocations of monies to immigration from $18.9 million last year to some $15.9 million this year, a difference of about $3 million. The operational costs of the detention center, the total operational cost for the detention center as of the 1st of July 2012, omitting June, is now $271,520.17, which gives an average monthly cost for operating the detention center of $24,000 and change. As far as repatriation costs are concerned, the total repatriation cost of illegal migrants by air from the 1st of July 2012 to the present, omitting the month of June, is now $973,553.84. Repatriation costs from January to May 2013 amount to $463,000 and some change. The item for repatriation in the budget has been increased this year from $1 million to $1,200,000, and we think that this fairly anticipates the demands which we will expect during the ensuing year. The number of immigrants repatriated from January to May 2013 stands at 1,433. So far we've repatriated up to May 2013 from January of this year 1,433 migrants. Of that number, 1,042 are Haitians and 391 are other nationals. Mr. Speaker, I've had the advantage over the past 2 months to visit with many foreign nationals. And I note all the problems that we have with crime. I had occasion to point out after the Americans issued an advisory on the Bahamas about the violence in the Bahamas that people, Bahamians, get really exercised about these advisories, but people forget that we, that is the Bahamas, issues advisories on the United States. When each year at Christmas time, we warn Bahamians about how they should shop in Miami and how to avoid being robbed while they're in Miami. That's just the obligations governments have. We do it every Christmas. Don't leave your stuff in an open van in Miami because you're going to get it teethed. To use the past tense. You can get robbed. We think, therefore, people are intelligent enough to know that the Bahamas is not consumed by violence as a result of any advisory issued by the United States State Department. It is, however, important to know of the critical importance of image and the experience which visitors have of this country when they come to this country. And you see it when you're on the plains and they see the water for the first time, they can't believe it. I'm pleased to report that having gone to many places in this job, that wherever I've gone, the image and memories of our country are good. I call it the aha moment. The moment when they ask you, where are you from? And you say, I'm from the Bahamas. And they say, aha. I recall sitting in Morocco at the Ministry of Tourism there, a meeting with the tourism officials. And one of the tourism officials couldn't speak a word of English, but he blurted out from across the table, it's better in the Bahamas. Or arriving in New York just last week, tired from a long flight, and the U.S. Customs Inspector looks at my passport and says, why are you so serious? You're going to the Bahamas. That's paradise. Or speaking in the well of the legislative houses in Illinois, and each representative or state senator that I met telling me without exception that they'd been to the Bahamas and what a great time they had. Just recently, Ms. Jacobson, who's the Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, number two job in the State Department, or number 3 job in the State Department, was saying, of course, I'd been to the Bahamas when I was in college, you know, with my college girlfriends. We came down, and we had a great time. She still has good memories of that. And, of course, we know that the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, was just here on a private holiday at the Ocean Club at Easter time. And, you know, I was teasing Ms. Jacobson. I said, you know, one of the Republican officials came and said, why didn't John Kerry pay a courtesy call on the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs? And I said, well, Bahamas is a tourist country. If you say you're coming on a private visit, why would I want to interfere with that? You know, everybody comes there for their privacy, and no one interferes with them. And he said, well, there's no way that if Condi Rice came here, she wouldn't, you know, be in touch with the Prime Minister or the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I told him, well, you know, I'm not getting in y'all's business. You know? Don't get me in that. But this image we must protect, Mr. Speaker. And that is why the success of this budget is so critical. And the Prime Minister describes it like this in his budget statement. We are also strengthening the foundations of the economy to secure steady growth and private sector employment creation. In this way, we are positioning my government to have the resources with which to implement over the full course of our mandate initiatives that will strengthen law and order, promote stronger growth and job creation, and solidify our firm commitment to maintaining and reforming our social safety net for the effective delivery of relief to the disadvantaged and needy in our midst. So we're committed to protecting this precious image that the Bahamas has. And all of us have to join in with it. I identify, Mr. Speaker, with all of those objectives. Foxhill, wherever I go, is foremost on my mind. Each day, trying to get one more person hired, another road fixed, another school repaired, another child a scholarship, to fix national insurance payments, or just to listen. I think I have, and I may have taken advantage of him, but I confess, I have the Prime Minister's commitment to finish the community center from the monies kindly allocated by China last week. You know, you whisper in the king's ear. So, ex parte pleading, then I tell the public. So anyway, and I'd like to, I want the government to buy the Junkanoo shack for the Congos so they can have a permanent home. And I invite all of you to the Foxhill Festival, which begins on Emancipation Day and ends on Foxhill Day. And on Wednesday, the 7th of August, I'm to give a lecture at the Mount Carey Baptist Church in Foxhill, which is the oldest church in the village, about the history of the settlement of Foxhill and its people, and it'll be televised nationwide, and a reception will follow. So you're all invited to join us. I am deeply aware of the impatience with the processes of government, the house repair program that needs to be done, the jobs for their kids. It will, with the help of God, get done. Yes. Now, those who know me know that my views are much more radical privately than I could ever express and remain comfortably within a group like the PLP. But public policy is often too deliberative, and it appears that public administrators are often not sensitive to what our party requires. But I am satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that the PLP continues to be the best repository of the national interest of the Bahamian people, and I certainly am glad to have lived long enough to see the back of Hubert Ingram. That alone is worth all the trouble on this road less traveled. That alone is worth all the trouble on this road less traveled. It has indeed made all the difference. The Bahamas is simply a more civilized place since he is no longer in its public policy. The PLP, therefore, and for whatever little that it's worth, continues to have my support, and I am honored to work with all colleagues within the Progressive Liberal Party. I trust that we continue to support the liberal values I espouse and the right to treat all people with the respect they deserve, judging them by the content of their characters. I've been a victim of prejudice all my life, and so I know it when I see it, and I mean that it must stop with us. The hymn writer describes the act of community in which politicians like myself participate in as acting above the storms of passion, the murmurs of self-will. There is no doubt then that the people of Fox Hill should know that I will serve them to the end. Thank you, sir. I commend the budget.
Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2013 and ending the 30th of June 2014. As many. The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's. The member yields. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bain and Grandstown.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House now suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon, 5th June 2013.
Very well. Do we have a second? It is moved and seconded the House suspends until the 3 p.m. this afternoon on the 5th of June, the year of our Lord 2013. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The House now suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
All rise.
Return the new Member of Parliament for North Abaco, Renato Curry, and the Member of Parliament for Carmichael, Dr. Daniel Johnson, the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, expected to present just heard the member for Fox Hill, Minister for Immigration and Foreign Affairs, saying he's going to look for additional funding from the government, from the Middle East and Asia. And he's going to make sure that those people who vote in 2017, the young people will be voting for the first time, that they will have reason to vote for the Progressive Liberal Party. Heard from the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, Michael Halkitis, laying out again in more detail the elements of Prime Minister Christie's budget and what should be expected over this coming fiscal year that begins on the 1st of July. A couple of revenue measures that people will be happy to hear. One is that 20% of all government contracts, that is something that they're moving, 20% of all government contracts will now go to small businesses. In terms of revenue enhancement, passenger tax says for 6-year-old children and under that are collected now by the airlines but not submitted to the government, those taxes are now going to be collected by the government. Again, the Minister of Immigration and Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Fred Mitchell, saying that he's going to be seeking funding for the government from the Middle East and Asia as the government looks to find revenue to do all the things it has promised that it will do certainly over the next 5 years. And he admonished and he warned his colleagues not to get wobbly on the immigration issue, because it is important that Bahamians are always put first. 3 o'clock this afternoon, Renato Curry and Dr. Daniel Johnson, when this budget debate continues. 7 o'clock tonight, 1 o'clock tomorrow, 10 o'clock p.m. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see you back here at 3 o'clock this afternoon.